A single dad veteran made a decision that would change everything. When 15 Hells Angels roared into town during the worst storm in decades, panic erupted. Neighbors locked their doors. Police were called. But Jack Hale, a decorated Marine with nothing but a failing garage and a 10-year-old daughter, did the unthinkable. He opened his door and invited them in. What happened next morning didn't just shock the town. It revealed a truth about courage, honor, and the men society had abandoned. Stay until the end and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. The sky over Millbrook, Pennsylvania had turned the color of a fresh bruise, purple, black, and swollen with rain that hadn't fallen yet but threatened everything beneath it. It was the kind of sky that made farmers check their livestock twice and mothers pull their children indoors early. The kind of sky that came with warnings scrolling across television screens and emergency alerts buzzing through cell phones with an urgency that made your stomach tighten. Jack Hale stood in the open bay door of his auto repair shop, watching the storm clouds roll in like an invading army. The air smelled metallic, charged with electricity that made the hair on his forearms stand up. Thunder rumbled in the distance, not the friendly summer kind that announced afternoon rain, but the deep, threatening kind that spoke of violence and destruction. The kind of thunder that reminded him of artillery fire in places most Americans couldn't find on a map. "Dad, the weather lady says it's going to be really bad," Ella called from inside the shop. His 10-year-old daughter sat cross-legged on the worn couch in his office, her homework spread across the coffee table, though her eyes were fixed on the small television mounted in the corner. She said there's going to be winds up to 70 miles per hour and maybe tornadoes. Jack turned back toward her, his weathered face creasing into what he hoped was a reassuring smile. At 38, he looked older than his years, the kind of aging that came from carrying weight that had nothing to do with physical fitness. His dark hair was shot through with premature gray at the temples, and lines had etched themselves permanently around his eyes and mouth. Lines from squinting into desert sun, lines from grief, lines from the kind of stress that never quite left, even years after you thought you'd escaped it. "We'll be fine, sweetheart," he said, though he made a mental note to check the storm cellar behind the building. The shop was solid, built in the 1950s with thick concrete walls and a reinforced roof, but nature didn't care much about construction quality when it really wanted to make a point. "Finish your math homework. I'm going to close up the bay doors." The repair shop was modest, 2 bays, a small office, and a waiting area that had seen better days. Jack had bought it 3 years ago with his discharge pay and a small business loan he was still struggling to repay. The sign outside read, "Hale's Automotive Repair," in faded letters that needed repainting. Business was slow. It was always slow. Millbrook was a small town, population 3,847 according to the sign on Route 19, and most people took their cars to the dealership 20 miles away in the next county. Jack survived on locals who remembered him from high school, on elderly customers who appreciated his honest assessments, and on his ability to fix anything with an engine, no matter how stubborn. He hit the button to lower the first bay door, watching it descend with a grinding mechanical whir. The second door followed, sealing the shop against the coming storm. Through the small windows set high in the walls, he could see the sky growing darker by the minute. The streetlights along Main Street flickered on early, triggered by sensors that recognized the premature twilight. "Is Mom going to call?" Ella asked quietly. Jack's hand froze on the door lock. It was a question she asked less frequently now, but it still had the power to stop him cold. "I don't know, baby," he said, keeping his voice neutral. "The storm's pretty big. Cell service might go down." It was a careful answer, a diplomatic answer. The truth was that Sarah hadn't called in 6 months. The last time had been Ella's birthday in April, and even then the conversation had lasted less than 5 minutes before Sarah made an excuse about needing to go, about her new life in California being really busy right now. Jack had stopped making excuses for her absence about a year ago. Ella was smart enough to understand that her mother had chosen a different path, one that didn't include the daughter she'd left behind or the husband she'd divorced when the weight of his PTSD and their financial struggles became too much for her to carry. "It's okay," Ella said, turning back to her homework with a practiced casualness that broke Jack's heart. "I was just wondering." Jack crossed to the office and pressed a kiss to the top of her head. She smelled like the strawberry shampoo she'd insisted on buying last week, and the cinnamon gum she wasn't supposed to chew during homework time, but did anyway. "You're doing great on those fractions," he said, looking over her shoulder at the worksheet covered in careful pencil marks and the occasional eraser smudge. "Mrs. Patterson says I'm the best in class at math," Ella said, a note of pride creeping into her voice. "She says I think like an engineer." "That's because you're brilliant," Jack replied. "Takes after your old man." Ella giggled. "Dad, you barely passed algebra. You told me that story like 100 times." "Barely passed is still passing," Jack said with mock dignity. "And I'm great with numbers when they involve carburetors and compression ratios." The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. Through the windows, Jack could see rain beginning to fall, tentatively at first, then with increasing intensity. Within seconds, it became a deluge, sheets of water hammering against the building with a roar that made conversation difficult. The storm had arrived. Jack moved through the shop, checking windows, making sure everything was secure. The building groaned under the assault of wind that had picked up suddenly, finding every gap and crack to howl through. This was going to be bad. Possibly the worst storm Millbrook had seen in years. He grabbed 2 flashlights from his toolbox, checked that both had fresh batteries, and set them on his desk where they'd be easy to find if the power went out. "Dad," Ella's voice carried a note of worry. "The TV says the tornado warning got upgraded. They're saying everyone should shelter in place." "We're good here," Jack assured her, though he was already calculating distances and timing. The storm cellar was accessible through a door in the back storage room, 15 feet of sprint through the shop if they needed it. "Come help me get some supplies together, just in case." They worked together gathering bottled water, the first aid kit, a battery-powered radio, and blankets from the storage closet. Jack added a box of granola bars and Ella's favorite stuffed rabbit, a worn creature named Mr. Whiskers she'd had since she was 3 and would never admit she still needed but always slept with. Preparation was something the Marine Corps had beaten into him until it became instinct. Proper preparation prevented poor performance. The 5 Ps his drill instructor had screamed at recruits until they recited it in their sleep. The rain hammered harder. The building shook with each gust of wind. Jack was considering whether they should move to the cellar when he heard it, a sound that cut through the storm's roar like a knife through fabric. The deep, throaty rumble of motorcycle engines. Not just 1 or 2, but many. A pack, a herd. A formation moving together through weather that should have kept any sensible person off the road. He moved to the window, wiping away condensation with his sleeve. Through the rain-blurred glass, he could barely make out shapes on Main Street. Motorcycles, heavy touring bikes built for long roads and hard weather, moving in a tight formation toward his shop. Lightning flashed, illuminating them for a split second in stark white light. Jack counted quickly, 15 bikes, maybe more, and they were all Harleys. "Dad, what is it?" Ella asked, sensing the sudden tension in his posture. Before Jack could answer, the lead motorcycle turned into his parking lot, followed by the others in perfect military precision. They pulled up to his bay doors in formation, engines rumbling even through the storm's noise. Through the rain and darkness, Jack could see the riders were soaked, their leather cuts dark with water, their bikes mud-splattered from hard riding through terrible conditions. The lead rider dismounted first, moving with the careful deliberation of someone who'd been riding too long in bad weather. Even from a distance, Jack could see the patches on the back of his vest. Lightning flashed again, and the image burned itself into Jack's vision, a skull with wings, stylized flames, and words he could read even through the rain. Hell's Angels Motorcycle Club. "Oh, hell," Jack breathed. Within seconds, panic erupted on Main Street like someone had triggered a silent alarm. Across the street, Mrs. Henderson, the 73-year-old widow who ran the antique shop, appeared in her window, saw the motorcycles, and vanished back inside so quickly Jack heard her door lock even through the storm. 2 doors down, Charlie Preston stood in the doorway of his hardware store, cell phone pressed to his ear, his face pale in the fluorescent light. He was calling the police. Jack knew it as surely as he knew his own name. Doors slammed up and down the street, lights flicked off in windows. Millbrook was a town of 3,000 souls that had never seen real trouble, where the most exciting thing to happen in recent memory was when teenagers had vandalized the high school mascot statue. The arrival of 15 Hells Angels in the middle of a catastrophic storm was the kind of thing that would be discussed for years. the kind of event that would define befores and afters in local history. "Dad, who are those people?" Ella asked, her voice small and uncertain. Jack's mind raced through options. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to stay inside, keep the doors locked, wait for the police to arrive and handle it. These were Hell's Angels, for God's sake. The name alone carried weight, decades of reputation, both earned and exaggerated. They weren't some weekend warrior riding club. They were an outlaw motorcycle club, with chapters across the country and a history that included everything from charity runs to federal investigations. But as Jack watched, the lead rider removed his helmet, and Jack saw his face, weathered, exhausted, and soaked to the bone. The man was probably in his 50s, with a gray beard and lines around his eyes that spoke of years lived hard. He looked up at the storm with an expression Jack recognized intimately, the look of someone who'd pushed too far, who'd made a bad decision and now had to live with the consequences. Behind him, the other riders dismounted. They moved stiffly, obviously cold and exhausted. One younger rider was shaking, whether from cold or fear, Jack couldn't tell. An older biker near the back sat hunched on his bike, and even from a distance, Jack could see him coughing. Thunder crashed directly overhead, close enough that the building shook, and Ella yelped in surprise. The storm was directly on top of them now, and the weather service had been right. This was the kind of system that spawned tornadoes, that tore roofs off buildings and turned trees into projectiles. Jack looked at his daughter, safe in his office with her homework and her stuffed rabbit. Then he looked back at the 15 men standing in his parking lot in the worst storm Pennsylvania had seen in a decade. His dog tag hung around his neck. He never took it off, not even to sleep. It was a simple piece of metal stamped with his name, rank, and serial number. But years ago, in a workshop on leadership during his second tour in Afghanistan, an old sergeant major had given every Marine in attendance a second tag, this one custom made with 4 words: honor before fear. Jack had carried it through his remaining tours. He'd carried it through firefights and IED attacks, and long nights standing watch while his brothers slept. He'd carried it through his medical discharge, through his divorce, through every hard day since coming home. Those 4 words had become his compass when nothing else made sense. Honor before fear. "Ella, stay here," Jack said quietly. "Dad, are you sure? Stay here, baby. Lock this door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me." He grabbed a rain jacket from the hook by the door, though he knew it wouldn't do much good. "I'll be right back." "Dad, everyone's scared of them," Ella said, her voice trembling. "Charlie Preston is calling the cops." "I know." Jack pulled on the jacket. "But they're people, Ella, and people shouldn't have to face a storm like this alone." He unlocked the office door and stepped into the main shop. Behind him, he heard Ella lock the door as instructed, though he could feel her watching through the office window. He crossed to the bay door, his heart pounding hard enough that he could feel it in his throat. His hands shook slightly as he reached for the button. Not from fear exactly, but from the weight of the decision he was making. Every rational part of his brain screamed at him to stop. These were Hell's Angels, outlaw bikers, men who lived by their own rules and had a reputation that preceded them like a shadow. This was stupid. This was dangerous. This could end badly in 100 different ways. But Jack's finger was already pressing the button. The bay door began to rise with a grinding mechanical whir that sounded impossibly loud in the storm-filled night. Rain hammered through the widening gap, blown horizontal by wind that was approaching dangerous speeds. Through the opening, Jack could see the 15 riders watching him with expressions ranging from surprise to suspicion to something that might have been desperate hope. The lead rider took a step forward, his hands visible and empty at his sides, a gesture of peace that Jack recognized from 1,000 tense encounters in war zones. He was big, probably 6'2" and solid, with the kind of build that came from years of physical work rather than gym workouts. His vest was heavy leather, worn soft with age and weather, adorned with patches that told a story Jack didn't know how to read. When the door was halfway up, Jack ducked under it and stepped out into the storm. Rain hit him like a physical force, soaking through his jacket in seconds. The wind tried to push him backward, and he had to brace himself against the building. "You folks look cold," Jack shouted over the storm, his voice barely carrying the 10 feet to where the lead rider stood. "You're welcome to come inside." For a moment, nobody moved. The riders looked at each other, then back at Jack, as if trying to determine whether this was a trap, whether he was serious, whether this mild-mannered mechanic standing in the rain was really inviting 15 Hells Angels into his shop in the middle of a catastrophic storm. The lead rider took another step forward, close enough now that Jack could see his eyes. Sharp blue, intelligent, and deeply weary. "You sure about that, brother?" he asked, his voice carrying a Texas drawl. "A lot of folks see these patches and make assumptions." "I see 15 people getting hammered by a storm that's only going to get worse," Jack replied. He had to shout now. The wind was screaming through the gap between buildings, carrying rain in sheets. "I see riders who need to get out of this weather before someone gets hurt. What you're wearing doesn't change that." Across the street, lights blazed on in the sheriff's office. Jack could see movement inside. Sheriff Tom Morrison and his deputy pulling on rain gear, preparing to come out and handle what they undoubtedly saw as a situation. Jack had maybe 2 minutes before authority arrived and made this decision for him. "We're not here to cause trouble," the lead rider said. His eyes flicked past Jack to the shop, then to the street where neighbors were watching from windows. "And we damn sure don't want to bring trouble to someone offering help. Maybe we should just—" "No." Jack's voice carried a note of command that surprised him. The voice of the staff sergeant he'd been a lifetime ago. The voice that had given orders to men in combat. "You're not riding another mile in this. That storm front is rotating. Weather Service says possible tornadoes. You're coming inside and we're not debating it." Lightning split the sky so close that the thunder was instantaneous, a crack that felt like the sky breaking open. The younger rider who'd been shaking lost his footing, stumbling against his bike. 2 of the other riders caught him, holding him steady. Jack could see now that the kid, he couldn't have been more than 22, was soaked and shivering violently past the point of safety. "Inside," Jack said again, gesturing to the open bay. "Now, before one of you ends up with hypothermia or worse." The lead rider held Jack's gaze for a long moment, some kind of calculation happening behind those blue eyes. Then slowly he nodded. "Ryder," he said, extending his hand. "Ryder Jones." "Jack Hale." Jack took the offered hand, feeling the firm grip of someone who meant what they said. "Get your people inside, Ryder. We'll sort everything else out once we're all dry." Ryder turned to his crew. "You heard the man? Let's move." The bikers didn't need to be told twice. They rolled their motorcycles into the shop's parking area just outside the bay, killed the engines, and moved inside with the practiced efficiency of men who had done this before, though probably never under these circumstances. They filed past Jack, each one nodding or murmuring thanks, their boots tracking water and mud across his concrete floor. Jack watched them come in, counting. 13, 14, 15, all accounted for. He hit the button to lower the bay door, and as it descended, he caught one last glimpse of Main Street, of faces in windows, of Sheriff Morrison stepping out of his office, of a town watching in disbelief as their local veteran mechanic, the quiet single dad who fixed cars and kept to himself, sheltered a motorcycle club that most people crossed the street to avoid. The door sealed shut with a heavy clang, muffling the storm's roar to a distant rumble. Inside the shop, 15 Hells Angels stood dripping on his floor, looking around with a mixture of relief and wariness. They were an intimidating sight, leather-clad, heavily tattooed, with the kind of presence that filled a room and made everything else seem smaller. Several were older, in their 50s or 60s, with gray in their beards and lines in their faces that spoke of long roads traveled. Others were younger, but all of them carried themselves with the same careful awareness that Jack recognized from military life. Men who'd learned to watch their surroundings, to assess threats, to never be caught unprepared. The youngest one, the kid who'd been shaking, stumbled to the wall and leaned against it, his teeth chattering audibly. His lips had a blue tinge that Jack didn't like. "Someone get him sitting down," Jack ordered, pointing to the waiting area couch. "And start getting out of those wet clothes if you've got anything dry." 2 of the older bikers immediately moved to help the kid, guiding him to the couch with surprising gentleness. Ryder watched Jack with an expression that was hard to read. Respect, maybe, mixed with curiosity. "You got any idea what you just did?" Ryder asked quietly. "Probably made a lot of my neighbors nervous," Jack admitted. He pulled off his soaked jacket and hung it on a hook, trying to appear calmer than he felt. His heart was still racing, adrenaline singing through his veins. But it's my shop, my choice. You folks needed help. I had the means to provide it. Seems pretty straightforward to me. Not many people see it that way when we pull up, Ryder said. There was something in his voice, not quite bitterness, but a bone-deep weariness with judgment, with assumptions, with being treated as a threat before being seen as human. Most folks see the patches and decide they know everything they need to know about us. Then most folks are missing out on the whole story, Jack replied. He moved toward the storage closet where he kept emergency supplies. I spent too many years having people make assumptions about me based on a uniform. Seemed like a good lesson to remember. He emerged with an armful of shop towels and an old blanket. Not much, but better than nothing. He tossed towels to the nearest riders, who caught them gratefully and began drying off. The blanket he brought to the young kid on the couch, who was still shaking despite being out of the storm. "What's your name, son?" Jack asked, wrapping the blanket around the kid's shoulders. Tommy, the kid managed through chattering teeth. "Tommy Reeves." "Okay, Tommy, you're going to be fine. We just need to get you warmed up." Jack turned to Ryder. "How long were you riding in that?" 4 hours, Ryder admitted. "Maybe 5. We were trying to outrun the front, but it caught us about an hour outside Harrisburg. Been fighting it since then, looking for someplace to hole up. Every motel we passed was either full or didn't want to rent to you," Jack finished. "Yeah." Ryder's jaw tightened. "That about covers it." Jack felt anger kindle in his chest, not at the bikers, but at a world that would leave 15 people to face a dangerous storm because of the patches on their backs. "Well, you're here now," he said. "Let me see what else I can dig up." He headed toward his office, where Ella would be waiting, probably scared and confused and needing reassurance that her dad hadn't lost his mind. As he approached the door, he could see her face pressed against the office window, her eyes wide as she watched the Hells Angels filling the shop. Jack knocked softly. "It's me, baby. Open up." The lock clicked, and Ella pulled the door open. She looked up at him with an expression that was equal parts frightened and curious. "Dad, are those really Hells Angels?" "They're people who needed help, Ella. That's what matters." Jack crouched down to her level, putting his hands on her shoulders. "I need you to be brave right now, okay? These men aren't going to hurt us. They just need somewhere safe to wait out the storm. But everyone's scared of them," Ella whispered, her eyes darting past him to where the bikers were toweling off and settling in. "Mrs. Henderson ran away and Charlie was calling the police and—" "I know," Jack said gently, "but being scared of someone doesn't mean they're actually dangerous. Sometimes people are scared because they don't understand, or because they've heard stories, or because someone looks different than what they're used to. But you know what I've learned?" "What?" "The bravest thing you can do is look past what scares you and see the person underneath." He tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear. "These guys have been riding through a terrible storm for hours. One of them is probably hypothermic. They need help, and we have the means to give it. That's what honor looks like, doing the right thing even when it's hard." Ella chewed her bottom lip, a habit she'd inherited from Jack. "Are you sure they're safe?" "Nothing in life is 100% sure," Jack admitted. "But yeah, baby, I think we're going to be fine. And I think maybe we're going to teach this town something about judging people by their covers." A sound from the shop made them both turn. Someone was knocking on the front door. Through the glass, Jack could see Sheriff Morrison and his deputy standing in the rain, their faces grim and determined. Behind them, Jack could make out other townspeople gathering despite the weather. Charlie Preston, with his cell phone still out, probably recording everything. Mrs. Henderson's son James, who'd played football with Jack in high school, and at least a dozen others, drawn by news spreading faster than the storm itself. "Stay here," Jack told Ella. "This might get complicated." He crossed the shop, very aware of 15 pairs of eyes watching him, very aware that what happened in the next few minutes would set the tone for everything that followed. Ryder had moved to stand near his crew, his posture protective but not threatening, a man ready to defend his people but hoping it wouldn't come to that. Jack unlocked the front door and opened it just enough to lean out. Rain immediately soaked the side of his face. "Evening, Tom." Sheriff Tom Morrison was 63 years old. 3 months from retirement, and had never dealt with anything more serious than drunk drivers and the occasional domestic dispute. He looked at Jack with a mixture of concern and frustration. "Jack, what in God's name are you doing?" "Providing shelter during a storm," Jack said evenly. "That a problem?" "You let 15 Hell's Angels into your shop," Tom said, stating the obvious. "Do you have any idea to—" "I let 15 people out of dangerous weather," Jack interrupted. "What they're wearing doesn't change the fact that there's a tornado warning in effect, and those folks were about to catch hypothermia." Deputy Rick Sanders, who was 31 and had served 2 tours in Iraq, leaned closer to peer past Jack into the shop. "Mr. Hale, we appreciate your service and everything, but this is a motorcycle club. These guys are standing right here and can hear every word you're saying," Ryder called from inside. He moved forward, his hands visible and non-threatening, until he stood beside Jack. "Sheriff, I'm Ryder Jones. This is my crew. We're not here to cause trouble. We got caught in the storm, and Mr. Hale here was kind enough to offer us shelter. We'll be on our way as soon as it's safe to ride." Tom looked from Ryder to Jack and back again, clearly out of his depth. "You understand how this looks? We got calls from half the town. People are scared." "Of what?" Jack asked, his voice hardening. "Of people they don't know? Of patches on a jacket? Or are they scared because it's easier to judge someone than to see them as human?" "Jack, no, Tom. You've known me since I was 8 years old. You know I'm not stupid, and you know I'm not reckless. These folks needed help. I had the means to provide it, and that's the end of the discussion. They're staying until the storm passes, and if anyone has a problem with that, they can take it up with me directly." Charlie Preston pushed forward through the gathering crowd. "Jack, be reasonable. These are Hell's Angels. They're criminals. You're endangering yourself and your daughter." "Mr. Preston," Ryder said, his voice carrying easily over the wind and rain, "with all due respect, you don't know a damn thing about me or my brothers. We're veterans, same as your friend Jack here. We wear these cuts, and people make assumptions, but that doesn't change the fact that every man in this shop served this country. We're not criminals. We're just people who ride motorcycles and look out for each other." "Veterans?" Deputy Sanders said, skepticism clear in his voice. Ryder reached for his wallet, moving slowly, clearly, so no one would mistake it for a threat, and pulled out a worn military ID card. "Sergeant Ryder Jones, United States Marine Corps, 1988 to 2012. 24 years of service, 2 tours in Desert Storm, 3 in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan. Most of my guys in there have similar stories. We're not the enemy, officer. We're just tired." The deputy took the ID, examined it, and passed it to Sheriff Morrison. Tom studied it for a long moment, then looked up at Ryder with a new expression. Not quite respect, but at least recognition of shared experience. "You're a Marine?" "Was a Marine," Ryder corrected. "These days I'm just a rider trying to stay dry." "Once a Marine, always a Marine," Jack said quietly. "Isn't that what they say?" Tom handed the ID back to Ryder and sighed, the sound of a man who'd just had his evening get infinitely more complicated. "Jack, you're sure about this?" "Completely," Jack replied without hesitation. "And you," Tom said, pointing at Ryder, "you and your crew are going to behave? No trouble?" "No trouble, Sheriff," Ryder promised. "You have my word." Tom looked at the crowd gathering behind him, at scared faces and suspicious eyes, at a town that had already made up its mind about who these strangers were. "All right," he said finally. "They can stay until the storm passes, but Jack, if anything, and I mean anything, goes wrong, you call me immediately. Understood?" "Understood," Jack agreed. The sheriff and his deputy retreated to their vehicle, but the crowd didn't disperse. If anything, more people arrived, drawn by curiosity and concern and the kind of instinct that makes humans gather to watch when something unusual happens. Jack could see phones out recording, taking pictures. This would be all over social media within minutes if it wasn't already. "Ignore them," Ryder said quietly as Jack closed and locked the door. "They'll get bored eventually." "Maybe," Jack replied, though he doubted it. Small towns had long memories and loved stories. This one would be repeated for years. The night Jack Hale let the Hells Angels into his shop during the worst storm in decades. He turned back to the bikers gathered in his space. They were watching him with expressions that ranged from gratitude to wariness, to something that might have been shame. Men who'd learned not to expect kindness, who'd been turned away so often that acceptance felt like a trap. "All right," Jack said, clapping his hands together. "Let's get practical. I've got more towels in storage and I can make coffee. It's not much, but it's hot and it's wet. Anyone hurt? Anything that needs immediate attention?" The bikers looked at each other, then at Ryder, who seemed to be their spokesman. "Tommy needs warming up," Ryder said, gesturing to the young man wrapped in Jack's blanket. "And Brick's been coughing for the last hour. Probably just a cold, but let me see." Jack crossed to the older biker Ryder had indicated, a massive man in his 60s, with a gray beard that reached his chest and hands the size of dinner plates. "I'm Jack. That cough sounds rough." "It's nothing," Brick rumbled, his voice like gravel in a cement mixer. Then he started coughing again, a wet, rattling sound that Jack didn't like at all. "How long you been sick?" "Few days, maybe a week." Brick shrugged like it was inconsequential. "Had worse." Jack put a hand on the man's forehead and found it burning hot. "You're running a fever. You need to get out of those wet clothes and get warm. Anyone else feeling sick?" Most of the bikers shook their heads, though a few looked like they were probably fighting the same cold Brick had. They'd been on the road, sleeping rough or in cheap motels, riding in all weather. Of course they were getting sick. It was a wonder more of them weren't falling apart. "Okay," Jack said. "Here's what we're going to do. I've got dry clothes in my office. Nothing fancy, just work clothes. But it's better than wet leather. You're all welcome to change. I'll get that coffee going, and I've got some canned soup we can heat up. Not gourmet, but it'll put something hot in your stomachs." "You don't have to do all this," one of the younger bikers said. He was maybe 30, with intricate tattoos covering both arms, and a facial scar that looked like it had come from something sharp. "You already did more than enough by letting us in." "Yeah, well, I let you in, so now you're my responsibility until this storm passes," Jack replied. "Marines don't do half measures. Either I help or I don't. I chose to help, so we're doing this right." Ryder smiled, the first real smile Jack had seen from him. "You really are a jarhead, aren't you?" "Staff Sergeant Hale, 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines," Jack confirmed. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq. Got out in 2015 after an IED decided to rearrange my spine. "You?" "Sergeant Jones, 1st Battalion, 3rd Marines. Started in the Gulf, ended up in Helmand Province." Ryder extended his hand again, and this time when Jack shook it, there was a different quality to the gesture, the recognition of shared experience, of brotherhood forged in combat. "Good to meet you, brother." "Likewise." The tension in the room shifted perceptibly. The bikers, who'd been standing in defensive clusters, began to relax slightly. It was still awkward, 15 strangers in a space meant for 2 or 3, but the air of potential violence had dissipated. They were just people now, tired and wet and grateful for shelter. Jack grabbed his keys and headed for the storage room where he kept his personal effects. Behind him, he heard the soft sound of Ella's office door opening, and when he turned, his daughter was standing there with her arms full of something. "Dad?" she said hesitantly. "I thought maybe they'd be cold." She was holding an armful of blankets, every spare one Jack owned, plus the comforter from her own bed. She looked terrified and brave simultaneously, a 10-year-old girl offering comfort to men who looked like they'd stepped out of a nightmare, but who were, in the end, just human. The shop went completely silent. 15 battle-hardened bikers stared at this small girl with her armful of blankets, and Jack watched several of them swallow hard, watched eyes that had seen too much soften with something that looked like pain. Ryder crouched down, bringing himself to Ella's level. "What's your name, darlin'?" "Ella," she whispered. "That's a beautiful name." "I'm Ryder." He gestured to the blankets. "Are these for us?" Ella nodded, not quite meeting his eyes. "My dad says you've been riding a long time in the storm. I thought you might be cold." "You thought right," Ryder said gently. He reached out slowly, giving Ella time to pull back if she wanted, and took the blankets from her arms. "This is one of the kindest things anyone's done for us in a long time. Thank you, Miss Ella." "You're welcome," Ella said, then looked up at her father for confirmation that she'd done the right thing. Jack felt his throat tighten with an emotion he couldn't quite name. Pride, certainly. Love, absolutely. But also a deep gratitude that his daughter, despite everything she'd been through, despite a mother who'd left and a father who struggled in a life that was harder than any child should be, still had the capacity for compassion. "That was perfect, baby," he said softly. Ryder stood and turned to his crew, holding the blankets. "Hear that, boys? Little Miss Ella here thinks we might be cold. Anyone need a blanket?" Every hand went up, not because they were all cold, Jack suspected, but because accepting this child's gift was a way of honoring the courage it took to offer it. Ryder distributed the blankets with the care of someone handling precious artifacts, and each biker who received one murmured thanks in Ella's direction. The youngest one, Tommy, who was still shivering despite the shop being warmer than outside, received Ella's own comforter, the one with the stars and moons pattern she'd picked out herself. He wrapped it around his shoulders, and Jack watched a tear slide down the kid's face. "Hey, Tommy," Ella said, moving closer despite her obvious nervousness. "Are you okay?" "Yeah," Tommy managed, his voice thick. "Yeah, It's just been a really long day, and people don't usually—" He trailed off, unable to finish. "My dad says people should be nice to each other," Ella said simply. "Even if they don't know each other, especially then." "Your dad's a smart man," Tommy said, "and you're a really brave kid." Ella smiled shyly, then retreated back to the office, content that she'd done her part. Jack watched her go, his heart simultaneously breaking and swelling with pride. 10 years old and already wiser than most adults. He turned back to the task at hand, getting 15 cold, wet men comfortable and fed. It took the better part of an hour. He broke out his personal stash of clean work clothes, coveralls, spare jeans, t-shirts with auto parts logos, anything remotely dry. The bikers changed in shifts, using the bathroom and the storage room for privacy, emerging looking less like intimidating outlaws and more like regular guys who'd had a rough night. Jack fired up the small coffee maker in his office, brewing pot after pot of cheap, strong coffee that the bikers accepted like it was liquid gold. He heated canned soup on the hot plate he usually used for his own lunches. Chicken noodle, tomato, vegetable, whatever he had in the cupboard. It wasn't much, but the bikers ate like they were at a 5-star restaurant, grateful for anything hot. As they ate and warmed up, the tension continued to ebb. The bikers began talking among themselves in low voices, the kind of easy conversation that comes from people who've known each other a long time. Jack caught fragments. Discussions about the storm, about routes and roads, about bikes that needed attention and parts that needed replacing. Normal conversation. Human conversation. Brick's cough persisted, so Jack dug out the first aid kit and found some cold medicine that was probably past its expiration date, but better than nothing. He made the big man take it with water and an extra blanket, then positioned him near the space heater Jack had set up in the corner. Outside, the storm raged on. Rain continued to hammer the building, and the wind had reached a steady howl that occasionally escalated to a scream when a particularly strong gust hit. The lights flickered periodically, and Jack kept the flashlights close, expecting power to fail at any moment. Ella had returned to her homework, but Jack could see her watching the bikers with fascination. They, in turn, seemed acutely aware of her presence, careful to moderate their language and behavior. Jack appreciated it. These men were making an effort to be appropriate guests despite circumstances that couldn't have been stranger. Ryder settled onto the floor near Jack's desk, a cup of coffee in his hands, and a tired contentment on his face. "You really didn't have to do all this," he said quietly. "The shelter would have been enough." "My dad was a Marine," Jack replied, dropping down to sit beside him. "He used to say that honor wasn't about doing the minimum required. It was about doing the maximum possible. I guess that stuck." "Good lesson." Ryder sipped his coffee. "Your old man still around?" "Died when I was 15, heart attack." Jack stared at his own coffee, remembering. "Never got to tell him I joined up. Always wondered if he'd have been proud." "He would have been," Ryder said with certainty. "You turned out good, Jack Hale. Better than good. You're the kind of Marine that makes the rest of us look better by association." "I don't know about that," Jack demurred. "I'm just a guy trying to do right." "That's exactly what I'm talking about." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the kind that happens between people who understand each other without needing constant conversation. Around them, the other bikers were settling in, some dozing despite the storm, others talking quietly. A few staring at their phones trying to get a signal that would let them call family and report they were safe. "Can I ask you something?" Jack said after a while. "Shoot." "Why the hell's Angels? I mean, you're a Marine. 24 years of service. You could have done anything after you got out. Why this?" Ryder was quiet for a long time, long enough that Jack thought maybe he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "What do you know about coming home, Jack?" "Enough," Jack replied quietly. "Then you know it's not easy. You know that one day you're living on a phobie in some desert hellhole, and the next day you're back in the world where nobody understands what you've been through or why you can't just turn it off and be normal again. You know about the nightmares and the way loud noises make you reach for weapons that aren't there anymore. You know about feeling like a stranger in your own country." Jack nodded. He knew all of that intimately. "Well, after I got out, I tried the normal thing, got a job at a factory, tried to settle down, but I couldn't make it work. Couldn't connect with people who'd never served. Couldn't explain the things I'd seen or done. I was drowning, Jack. Drowning in a world that wanted me to smile and pretend like 24 years at war hadn't changed me." "So you found the club," Jack said, understanding. "So I found the club," Ryder confirmed. "And suddenly I was with people who got it, people who'd been there, who'd seen things, who understood that coming home doesn't mean the war's over. We ride together, we look out for each other, and nobody judges us for being broken in ways civilians can't understand." "You're not broken," Jack said. Ryder smiled sadly. "We're all broken, brother. Some of us just hide it better than others." Thunder crashed overhead, close enough that the lights flickered ominously. Ella yelped from the office, and Jack started to rise, but Ryder was faster. "Hey there, Miss Ella," Ryder said, moving to the office door. "You doing okay?" "I don't like thunder," Ella admitted, her voice small. "Yeah? Well, can I tell you a secret?" Ryder crouched down. "Neither do I. Loud noises make me jumpy. Have ever since I came back from overseas. But you know what helps?" "What?" "Remembering that it's just noise. It can't hurt you. It's just the sky being dramatic." He glanced at Jack for permission, then said, "You want to sit with us for a bit? Your dad and I are just talking. You're welcome to join us if you want." Ella looked at Jack, who nodded encouragement. She emerged from the office, clutching Mr. Whiskers, her stuffed rabbit, and settled between Jack and Ryder like she'd known them both her whole life. Jack put an arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him with the trust that only children have, the certainty that as long as Dad was there, everything would be okay. "Mr. Ryder was in the Marines too," Jack told her. "He served even longer than I did." "Did you know my dad over there?" Ella asked. "No, darling. We were in different units, different times, but we're still brothers in a way. Marines always are." "Dad says the Marines taught him to be brave," Ella said. "Is that right?" Ryder looked at Jack with amusement. "What else did Dad say?" "That being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when you are scared." "Your dad's a smart man," Ryder said, "and he's right. Bravery isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing what needs doing anyway." Another gust of wind hit the building so hard that something outside crashed, probably a trash can or a loose sign. Several of the bikers tensed, old instincts kicking in, hands reaching for weapons that weren't there. Jack recognized the response, the hypervigilance that never quite left, the way combat veterans were always just a little bit on alert, always ready for something to go wrong. "Easy," Ryder called out to his crew. "Just the storm." They relaxed gradually, but Jack noticed several of them looked embarrassed, like their reaction had given something away. He wanted to tell them it was okay, that he did the same thing, that his daughter had learned not to pop balloons around him because the sound made him drop to the floor in a panic that was as automatic as breathing. But he stayed quiet, letting them keep their dignity. "So," Jack said, changing the subject, "where were you all headed before the storm hit?" "Nowhere specific," Ryder replied. "We do an annual run, just ride for a few weeks, see the country, visit other chapters. We were heading east, figured we'd make it to the coast before turning back. Then the weather turned bad." "Annual run," Ella repeated. Like a vacation? Exactly like that, Ryder said, smiling at her. We work regular jobs most of the year. I'm a mechanic, just like your dad. Brick over there is a welder. Tommy's a college student, if you can believe it. But once a year, we all get together and ride. That sounds fun, Ella said wistfully. I've never been on a motorcycle. Never? Ryder looked genuinely shocked. Jack, you're failing this child's education. Everyone should ride at least once. She's 10, Jack said, and I sold my bike when she was born. Couldn't afford to keep it and pay for diapers. Fair point, Ryder conceded. But someday when she's older, you should take her out. There's nothing like the freedom of the open road. It's the closest thing to flying without leaving the ground. Maybe, Jack allowed, though he doubted it would ever happen. Motorcycles cost money, and money was something he never seemed to have enough of. The conversation drifted into easier topics: favorite roads, memorable rides, the differences between bike models. Jack found himself relaxing despite the circumstances, found himself enjoying the company of these men he'd known for less than 2 hours, but who felt, in some strange way, familiar. They had that same dark humor he remembered from the Corps, the same way of dealing with hardship through jokes and stories, the same brotherhood that came from shared experience. Around 11 o'clock, Ella started nodding off against Jack's shoulder. He carried her to the office couch, tucked her in with her remaining blanket, and left Mr. Whiskers beside her where she could reach him. She barely stirred, exhausted by the emotional roller coaster of the evening and the late hour. When Jack returned to the main shop, he found several of the bikers had also fallen asleep, heads pillowed on backpacks, wrapped in Ella's blankets, looking vulnerable in a way that they probably never allowed themselves to look when awake. The ones still awake spoke in hushed voices, respectful of those sleeping. "Your kid's something special," Tommy said from his nest of blankets near the space heater. His color had improved, and he'd stopped shivering, though he still looked exhausted. When she brought out those blankets, man, I can't remember the last time someone did something nice for me without wanting something in return. That's how we raised her, Jack said. To see people as people, not as categories or stereotypes. You raised her right, another biker chimed in, this one named Carlos, who'd served in the Army Rangers and had more tattoos than bare skin visible. In this world, that kind of compassion is rare. Protect that in her. Don't let life make her hard. I'm trying, Jack said softly. God knows I'm trying. The power flickered one more time, then went out completely, plunging the shop into darkness broken only by the flashlights Jack had set up earlier and the glow of phone screens. The emergency lighting kicked in, dim battery-powered LEDs that cast everything in a ghostly blue-white. Well, that was inevitable, Ryder said. How's your phone signal? Jack checked. Nothing. You? Same. Towers are probably down. Ryder stood and stretched, his back cracking audibly. Means nobody's getting updates on the storm. As if in answer, the wind suddenly dropped to nothing. The rain stopped mid-beat. The sudden silence was more unnerving than the storm had been. That's not good, Jack said, his military training recognizing the danger immediately. No, Ryder agreed. That's not good at all. They moved to the window, pressing their faces against the glass to look out at Main Street. In the emergency lighting from various buildings, they could see trees bent at impossible angles, debris scattered everywhere, and an eerie green tint to the sky that made Jack's stomach drop. Everyone up, Ryder commanded, his voice carrying the authority of a man used to being obeyed in crisis situations. Now, we need to move. The bikers woke instantly, no grogginess or confusion, just immediate alertness that spoke of years of training. They were on their feet in seconds, looking to Ryder for direction. Tornado? Carlos asked. Probably, Jack confirmed. He ran to his office, scooped up Ella despite her sleepy protests, and grabbed the emergency supplies he'd prepared earlier. Storm cellar, back of the building. Let's go. They moved as a unit, 15 bikers, 1 veteran, and 1 confused, half-asleep child, through the shop toward the back storage room. Jack led the way, Ella in his arms, with Ryder right behind him, keeping the others organized. Tommy, help Brick move faster. Carlos, grab those supplies. Everyone stays together. Nobody gets left behind. Jack hit the storage room and threw open the cellar door, revealing concrete steps leading down into darkness. The cellar was small, meant for maybe 6 people at most, But it was solid, built in the 1950s when people took civil defense seriously. Reinforced concrete and steel meant to withstand bombs. "Down," Jack ordered. "Quickly." The bikers filed down, packing into the space with military efficiency, making room for each other without complaint. Jack came last, pulling the heavy steel door shut behind him and throwing the bolt that sealed them in. The space was cramped. 15 large men, one adult, and one child pressed together in an area that measured maybe 8 by 10 feet. But nobody complained. "Dad, what's happening?" Ella asked, fully awake now and scared. "Just being careful, baby," Jack said, holding her close. "The storm's doing something weird, and this is the safest place to be." They huddled in the darkness, flashlights providing small islands of light. Jack found the battery-powered radio and turned it on, searching for a station that was still broadcasting. Static filled most frequencies, but finally he caught a local station. Repeating, tornado confirmed on the ground, currently tracking through downtown Millbrook, moving northeast at 30 miles per hour. "This is an extremely dangerous situation. If you are in Millbrook, take cover immediately. Get to your lowest floor, away from windows." The radio cut out as the tornado hit. The sound was unlike anything Jack had ever heard. Worse than incoming mortars, worse than IEDs, worse than anything his combat experience had prepared him for. It sounded like a freight train and a jet engine, and the end of the world all rolled into one sustained roar that made the walls shake and dust rain from the ceiling. The building above them groaned and screamed. Jack heard glass shattering, metal tearing, wood splintering. Something massive hit the shop with enough force that the cellar door buckled inward slightly, and several of the bikers moved to brace it, throwing their weight against steel to keep it from giving way. Ella buried her face in Jack's chest, her small hands fisting in his shirt. Around them, hardened combat veterans held their breath, held each other, held on to whatever they could reach. Ryder had grabbed Jack's shoulder with one hand and Tommy's arm with the other, creating a chain of human connection that spread through the group, everyone touching someone, nobody alone. The roar went on forever. 30 seconds that felt like 30 minutes. Jack counted in his head the way he'd learned in basic training, trying to estimate the tornado's size and speed and proximity. Ella was crying quietly, and he held her tighter, murmuring reassurances he wasn't sure were true. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the roar moved on. The sound diminished, traveling away from them toward the northeast, leaving destruction in its wake. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They sat in the darkness, listening to the creaks and groans of the building above them, listening for the sound of collapse, listening to their own breathing and the thunder of their hearts. "Everyone okay?" Ryder finally asked. A chorus of affirmatives came back, shaken but uninjured, scared but alive. "Jack?" "We're good," Jack replied, though his hands were shaking. "Ella, you okay, baby?" "Uh-huh," Ella managed, though she wouldn't let go of him. "That was really scary, Dad." "I know, but it's over now. We're safe." "Should we go up?" Tommy asked. "Not yet," Jack said. "Give it a few more minutes. Make sure it's really passed." They waited in the cramped darkness, nobody complaining about the lack of space or air, just grateful to be alive. Jack found himself thinking about the shop above them, his livelihood, his investment, everything he'd built since leaving the military. If the tornado had destroyed it, but he pushed the thought away. Material things could be replaced. The life he held in his arms, the men pressed around him in this concrete box, these things mattered. These things were irreplaceable. After 10 minutes that felt like hours, Jack finally unbolted the cellar door and pushed it open. The resistance was significant. Something had fallen against it, but between him and Ryder, they managed to force it wide enough to squeeze through. The storage room was relatively intact, though water dripped from a new crack in the ceiling. Jack helped Ella through, then turned to assist the bikers as they emerged into the darkened building. When they made it to the main shop, everyone stopped and stared. The building had held. The walls stood, the roof was mostly intact, and the structure remained sound. But the bay doors were gone, ripped completely away and deposited God knew where. One of the windows had shattered, showering glass across the floor. Water poured in through gaps in the roof where shingles had been torn away. But they were alive. The shop was damaged, but standing. And as Jack looked at the 15 men who'd emerged from the cellar with him, at his daughter clinging to his hand, at the first light of dawn beginning to show through the missing bay doors, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. "Well," Ryder said, surveying the damage with the practical eye of someone who'd seen worse, "I guess we've got some cleanup to do." "You don't have to," Jack started. "Brother," Ryder interrupted, "you saved our lives tonight. Twice. Once when you let us in, and once when you got us to that cellar. We owe you." He turned to his crew. "What do you say, boys? Feel like returning a favor?" Every single biker nodded. As dawn broke over Millbrook and the residents emerged to survey the damage the tornado had wrought, they would find something they never expected to see: 15 Hells Angels working alongside a single dad veteran, beginning the long process of rebuilding what the storm had broken. But that was a story for the morning. For now, in the pre-dawn darkness, a different kind of brotherhood had been forged. One built on trust, on compassion, on the simple act of opening a door when everyone else had theirs locked tight. Jack Hale had made a choice guided by 4 words engraved on a dog tag: honor before fear. He had no idea yet just how much that choice would change everything. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the gaping holes where Jack's bay doors had been, painting the destruction in shades of gold and amber that made everything look almost beautiful if you didn't look too closely at the details. Jack stood in the opening, surveying what remained of Main Street with a hollow feeling in his chest that had nothing to do with physical injury and everything to do with the crushing weight of reality settling over him like a wet blanket. Millbrook looked like a war zone. Not the sanitized version you saw in movies, but the real thing, the kind Jack remembered from Helmand Province after particularly bad engagements. Trees that had stood for 100 years lay across the street like fallen soldiers, their root systems exposed and vulnerable. The hardware store's roof had partially collapsed, leaving Charlie Preston's building looking like a dollhouse someone had stepped on. Cars sat overturned in positions they'd never reached under their own power. Power lines draped across everything like deadly spider webs, sparking occasionally with blue-white flashes that made Jack's teeth ache. Mrs. Henderson's antique shop had lost its entire front window display, and he could see furniture scattered across the sidewalk, Victorian chairs and Depression-era lamps lying in puddles like drowning victims. The old maple tree in front of the post office, the one that had been planted when the town was founded in 1847, had been snapped in half 20 feet up, its crown driven through the roof of the building next door like a spear. "Jesus," Ryder breathed, coming to stand beside Jack. His voice carried the same hollow note that Jack felt. "Looks like Fallujah after the Marines came through." "Yeah," Jack agreed quietly. "Yeah, it does." Behind them, the other bikers emerged one by one, each stopping to stare at the devastation with expressions that ranged from shock to grim acceptance. These were men who'd seen destruction before, who'd walked through the aftermath of bombs and artillery strikes. But there was something uniquely terrible about seeing it happen to an American town, to a place that was supposed to be safe. Ella squeezed between Jack and Ryder, still clutching Mr. Whiskers, her eyes going wide as she took in the scene. "Dad, is everyone okay?" It was the question Jack had been dreading because he didn't know the answer. The tornado had carved a path right through downtown. There were at least 50 buildings in its track, and God only knew how many people had been inside them when it hit. The sheriff's office was dark, either without power or empty. He couldn't tell which. No emergency vehicles were visible yet, though Jack could hear sirens in the distance, coming closer. "I don't know, baby," he said honestly, "but we're going to find out, and then we're going to help whoever needs it." Movement across the street caught his attention. A door opened in one of the buildings that looked relatively intact, and a figure stumbled out. Mrs. Henderson, moving like someone who'd just been through a washing machine, her white hair disheveled and her dress torn. She made it 3 steps before her knees gave out, and she went down hard on the debris-strewn sidewalk. Jack was moving before he consciously decided to, his combat medic training overriding everything else. He covered the distance in seconds, Ryder matching him stride for stride, and they reached Mrs. Henderson just as she was trying to push herself up on shaking arms. "Easy now," Jack said, putting a hand on her shoulder. "Mrs. Henderson, it's Jack Hale. Are you hurt?" The old woman looked up at him with eyes that were glazed with shock. Jack? Oh, Jack, it was so loud. The noise. And my shop. All my beautiful things. I know, Jack soothed. He ran through a quick assessment, checking for obvious injuries. No bleeding he could see, no obvious breaks. Can you tell me where you hurt? Everywhere, she whispered. But nothing's broken. I hid in my bathroom, just like they said to do on the television. I heard everything breaking, heard the walls shaking, and I thought I was going to die, Jack. I thought that was the end. But you didn't die, Jack said firmly. You did exactly right. And you're alive, and that's what matters. Can you stand? With Jack and Ryder's help, Mrs. Henderson got to her feet, though she swayed dangerously. Ryder kept a steady hand on her elbow, his expression gentle in a way that transformed his weathered face. Ma'am, I'm Ryder, he said. Why don't we get you somewhere you can sit down properly? Do you have anyone we should call? Mrs. Henderson blinked at him, seeming to really see him for the first time. Her eyes went to the Hells Angels patch on his vest, still visible, even though he'd changed into dry clothes, his cut now worn over a borrowed t-shirt from Jack's collection. Jack watched her face cycle through confusion, recognition, and then something that looked like embarrassment. You're one of them, she said. One of the motorcycle men from last night. I called you criminals. I said Jack was a fool for letting you in his shop. Yes, ma'am, Ryder said evenly. You did say that. And here you are helping me, Mrs. Henderson's voice cracked. Here you are, and I was so hateful, and— Ma'am, Ryder interrupted gently. You were scared. People say things when they're scared. What matters is right now, and right now you need help. So let's worry about getting you safe and leave the apologies for later when everyone's had some sleep. More doors were opening now along Main Street. People emerged like survivors of some apocalyptic event, stumbling over debris, calling for neighbors, searching for loved ones. Jack saw James Henderson, Mrs. Henderson's son, come running from a side street, his face pale with terror until he spotted his mother. The relief that crossed his features was so profound that Jack felt it in his own chest. Mom! James reached them at a dead sprint. Mom, thank God, I've been trying to call. The lines are down, and I thought, I'm fine, Mrs. Henderson assured him, though she clung to her son with the desperate strength of someone who genuinely thought they might never see their family again. These men helped me. Jack and his friend. James looked at Jack with gratitude. Then his eyes landed on Ryder, and the recognition hit. Jack watched James's expression shift, surprise, confusion, and then a dawning understanding that looked almost painful. You're the bikers from last night, James said. That's right, Ryder confirmed. I was in the crowd, James admitted, his voice thick with shame. I was one of the people saying Jack was crazy for letting you in. I said you were dangerous. I said— He stopped, swallowed hard. I'm sorry. I was wrong. Like I told your mother, apologies can wait, Ryder said. Right now, let's make sure everyone's accounted for. You got somewhere safe you can take her? My house is outside the damage path, James said. Mom, come on, let me get you home. As James led his mother away, Jack heard her say something that made him pause. Those men aren't criminals, James. They're angels. Actual angels. Jack turned to find the rest of Ryder's crew had spread out along the street, already helping. Tommy, who'd been hypothermic just hours ago, was helping an elderly man climb over a fallen tree. Brick, who'd been running a fever, was using his massive strength to lift debris off a car that had been crushed by a telephone pole. Carlos had found a mother with 3 small children, was carrying the youngest while helping the others navigate the dangerous terrain. Boys, Ryder called out. Sound off, everyone okay? Good here, Tommy called back. All good, Brick rumbled. One by one, the bikers confirmed they were uninjured, and Jack felt something loosen in his chest. He'd been responsible for these men from the moment he'd opened his door, and knowing they were safe made the rest of the situation just slightly more bearable. Sheriff Morrison appeared at the end of the street, Deputy Sanders beside him, both men looking like they'd aged 10 years overnight. The sheriff's cruiser was dented and missing a door, but it was still mobile. Morrison's eyes swept the scene, landing on Jack and the bikers with an expression that was impossible to read. Jack, Morrison called, picking his way through the rubble. You and your people okay? We're fine, Tom, Jack replied. Building took some damage, but we sheltered in the cellar. Everyone made it through. Thank God for that. Morrison rubbed his face with both hands. We've got reports of damage all through downtown. No confirmed fatalities yet, but there are people trapped. Fire department's on the way from the county, but it's going to take them at least 30 minutes to get here with all the roads blocked. What do you need? Jack asked, already knowing the answer. Everything, Morrison said bluntly. We need search and rescue. We need debris cleared. We need someone with medical training to check on folks until the ambulances can get through. We need... He stopped, seeming to really see the Hells Angels for the first time since arriving. I need all the help I can get, and I'm not too proud to accept it from wherever it comes. Then you've got us, Ryder said, stepping forward. 15 able bodies, all with military training. Half of us have medical experience. We can help. Morrison looked at Ryder for a long moment, and Jack could see the calculation happening behind the sheriff's eyes. Accepting help from an outlaw motorcycle club wasn't the kind of decision that a small-town sheriff made lightly. It was the kind of thing that could make or break a reputation, the kind of choice that would be dissected and discussed for years. All right, Morrison said finally. Here's how this works. You operate under my authority. You do what I tell you, when I tell you, and you don't go off on your own. Anyone breaks those rules, everyone leaves. Understood? Crystal clear, Sheriff, Ryder said. We're here to help, not to complicate your life. Good. Morrison pulled out a notebook that had somehow survived the storm. Jack, you're with me coordinating. You know this town, you know the people. Ryder, split your crew into teams. I need search and rescue at the Presbyterian Church, roof collapse, possibly people inside. I need debris clearance on Oak Street so emergency vehicles can get through. And I need someone checking on the elderly residents who might not have made it out of their homes. Tommy, Brick, Carlos, your search and rescue, Ryder ordered without hesitation. Snake, Chains, Dusty, debris clearance. Everyone else with me doing welfare checks. Move out, and remember, we're representing the club here. We do this right. The bikers dispersed with military precision, each team heading toward their assigned area with purpose and focus. Jack watched them go, these men who'd been feared and rejected just 12 hours ago, now running toward danger to help people who'd treated them like criminals. I was wrong about them, Morrison said quietly, watching the same scene Jack was. Dead wrong. A lot of people were, Jack replied. Including me, said a voice behind them. They turned to find Charlie Preston standing there, his face streaked with dirt and what might have been tears. His hardware store was partially collapsed. The inventory Jack could see through the gaps was destroyed, and the man looked like his world had ended. Jack, I owe you an apology. I said terrible things last night. I called the cops on you. I tried to get those men thrown out into the storm, and if you'd listened to me, they'd have been out there when the tornado hit. They'd probably be dead. But they're not, Jack said. That's what matters. And now they're helping, Charlie continued, his voice breaking. Now they're risking themselves to help us, even after how we treated them. What kind of men do that? Good ones, Jack said simply. The kind who know that doing the right thing isn't conditional on being treated right. A crash from down the street made them all turn. The search and rescue team had reached the Presbyterian Church, and Jack could see the building was in bad shape. The distinctive white steeple that had been a landmark for generations had been twisted at an angle, and the roof had partially caved in on the eastern side. Sunday services would have been empty. It was Monday morning, but Pastor Williams lived in the rectory attached to the church, and his wife Sarah was there too, along with their teenage daughter Emma. Tom, we need to get over there, Jack said urgently. They ran, Morrison and Sanders and Jack, with Charlie following because he couldn't seem to do anything else. By the time they arrived, Tommy was already coordinating the rescue effort with the calm competence of someone who'd done this before in far worse circumstances. Building's unstable, Tommy reported. Roof could come down any second, but we've got voices, at least 2 people, maybe 3. They're trapped in what I think is the living quarters, eastern side, probably under debris. Can we get to them? Morrison asked. Yeah, but it's going to be tight. And we need to shore up that section of roof before we go in, or the whole thing comes down. Tommy's eyes scanned the wreckage, calculating angles and weights and risks. Brick, we need support beams. Anything that'll hold weight. Check the hardware store. On it, Brick called, already moving. Jack stepped forward. I'm going in with you. Jack, you don't have to... Morrison started. Yes, I do, Jack interrupted. I know the Williams family. Emma babysits Ella sometimes. If she's in there scared, she needs to hear a familiar voice. Tommy looked at Jack, assessing, then nodded. You ever do structural rescue? Afghanistan 2012, building collapse after a rocket attack. I've done it. Good enough for me. Ryder, we need someone else. Who's got small building experience? Carlos, Ryder said immediately. He was a construction engineer before he joined the club. Carlos. The tattooed biker jogged over, listened to a 30-second briefing, and nodded. Show me what we're working with. For the next 15 minutes, Jack watched Tommy and Carlos work with the kind of professional competence that made Morrison's earlier concerns about criminals look absurd. They were systematic, careful, and clearly knew exactly what they were doing. Brick returned with an armful of 2x4s from Charlie's destroyed inventory, and they constructed a temporary support system that would give them maybe 20 minutes before the roof gave way completely. That's all the time we've got, Tommy said. In and out, fast and clean. Jack, you're with me. Carlos, you're back up in case we need to hand victims out. Brick, you hold those supports no matter what. If that roof shifts, you yell and we all run. Clear? Everyone confirmed they understood. Jack pulled on a pair of work gloves someone handed him and followed Tommy into the collapsed structure. The interior was a nightmare of splintered wood, shattered glass, and crumbled plaster. Water dripped from broken pipes. Electrical wires hung loose and dangerous. Every surface was unstable. Every step a calculated risk. Hello? Jack called out. Pastor Williams? Sarah? Can you hear me? Here. The voice was faint but distinct. We're here. Please, our daughter's hurt. Tommy and Jack followed the voice, crawling over debris, squeezing through gaps, their flashlights cutting through the dust-thick air. They found them in what had been the rectory's living room, Pastor Williams covering his wife and daughter with his own body as the ceiling had come down. The pastor's back was bleeding from where something sharp had caught him, but he hadn't moved, hadn't left his family exposed. Emma was pinned under a beam, her leg twisted at an angle that made Jack's stomach turn. She was conscious but pale, shock written across her young face. Sarah Williams was crying quietly, her hand holding her daughter's, her other hand pressed against her husband's back, trying to slow the bleeding. Jack? Emma whispered. Is that you? Yeah, sweetheart, it's me, Jack said, forcing his voice to stay calm and reassuring. We're going to get you out of here, okay? This is my friend Tommy. He knows what he's doing. Tommy was already assessing the situation with quick, efficient movements. Beam's got her trapped at the femur. We lift it, we carry her out. But we've got maybe 10 minutes before this whole place comes down. He looked at Jack. You steady? As a rock, Jack lied. His hands were shaking, his heart racing, memories of other rescues, some successful, some not, threatening to overwhelm him. But Emma needed him steady, so steady as what he'd be. Okay. On 3, we lift. Pastor, soon as that beam's clear, you grab your daughter and move. Don't worry about being gentle. Just move. Sarah, you help him. Jack and I will be right behind you. Tommy positioned himself. 1, 2, 3. They lifted. The beam was heavier than Jack expected, easily 200 pounds of solid wood, and his back screamed in protest. The old injury from the IED flared hot and vicious, but he gritted his teeth and held. Tommy grunted with effort beside him, muscles straining, face going red. Pastor Williams didn't hesitate. He scooped Emma up despite her cry of pain and started moving. Sarah followed, and then Tommy and Jack were backing out, still holding the beam, moving as fast as they dared through the unstable structure. Roof's shifting, Brick's voice boomed from outside. You got maybe 2 minutes. Go, 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 Tommy shouted. They burst out of the building in a scramble of movement, Carlos catching Emma from her father's arms, everyone running clear. Jack and Tommy dropped the beam and ran the last 20 feet just as the temporary supports gave way and the roof collapsed inward with a sound like the world ending. Jack hit the ground hard, rolled, came up gasping. Tommy was beside him, and they were both covered in dust and dirt but alive. The Williams family was being attended to by Ryder and several other bikers. Emma was crying but conscious. Pastor Williams was standing despite his injuries, his arm around his wife, all three of them staring at the collapsed church with expressions of numb shock. "Thank you," Pastor Williams said, turning to Jack and Tommy. His voice was rough with emotion. "Thank you. You saved our lives." "Thank your builder," Tommy replied, breathing hard. "That rectory was solid. Gave us the time we needed." "No," the pastor said firmly. "Thank you, and thank God for sending you when we needed you most." He looked at Tommy's vest, at the Hells Angels patch clearly visible. "I've been a pastor for 30 years. I've preached a lot of sermons about not judging people by appearances. Today, God sent me a reminder that I needed to practice what I preach." Morrison's radio crackled to life. "Sheriff, this is Fire Chief Watson. We're 5 minutes out, but Oak Street is completely blocked. We can't get through." "Copy that," Morrison replied, then looked at where the debris clearance team was working. "Jack, think your boys can clear it faster?" "They're not my boys, they're riders," Jack corrected. "But yeah, I think they can." The next 3 hours were a blur of coordinated chaos. The Hells Angels worked alongside arriving firefighters and EMTs, the initial wariness dissolving in the face of competence and genuine willingness to help. The debris clearance team managed to open Oak Street in under an hour, working with a combination of brute force, strategic demolition, and the kind of teamwork that came from years of riding together. Brick, despite his fever and cough, lifted things that should have required mechanical assistance. Snake, a wiry biker with prison tattoos and the gentlest hands Jack had ever seen, helped EMTs triage the injured. Chains, whose real name was Marcus and who'd been a combat engineer in the Army, assessed structural damage and marked dangerous buildings. And everywhere they worked, the bikers were met with the same response: initial fear or suspicion that transformed into gratitude and then into something that looked like shame. Millbrook's residents were being forced to confront their own prejudices in the most direct way possible, and for many of them, it was clearly uncomfortable. Jack coordinated from a makeshift command post Morrison set up in front of the sheriff's office. Ella stayed close, helping where she could, running messages, bringing water to workers, offering words of encouragement that were surprisingly effective coming from a 10-year-old girl. She'd adopted the bikers as her personal heroes, and they in turn treated her with a protective gentleness that made Jack's throat tight. Around noon, a news crew from Harrisburg arrived, having navigated the blocked roads to get the story. The reporter was a young woman named Jennifer Chase, who'd clearly expected to find devastation and chaos. What she found instead was a story that her cameraman immediately recognized as something special. "Who are these guys?" Jennifer asked Morrison, watching as the bikers worked. "They're not fire department, not local emergency services, but they're everywhere, doing everything." "They're the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club," Morrison said. There was a pause as Jennifer's face cycled through disbelief. "The Hells Angels," she repeated. "The Outlaw Motorcycle Club." "The same," Morrison confirmed. "Got caught in the storm last night. Local veteran named Jack Hale gave them shelter. When the tornado hit and we needed help, they stepped up." Jennifer's eyes went sharp with the instinct of someone who recognized a major story. "Can I interview them?" "That's up to them," Morrison said. "But you should know, these men are veterans. Every single one of them served. They're not the stereotypes you might be expecting." Jennifer approached Ryder, who was taking a water break and looking exhausted. Jack watched the interaction from a distance, saw Ryder's initial reluctance give way to what looked like resignation. If the club was going to be in the news anyway, better to control the narrative. The interview lasted about 10 minutes. Jack couldn't hear what was said, but he could see the reporter's expression change from professional skepticism to genuine engagement. When she finished with Ryder, she interviewed Tommy, then Brick, then several of the townspeople who'd been helped. "Mr. Hale?" Jennifer approached Jack with her cameraman in tow. "I understand you're the one who gave the Hells Angels shelter last night." "I gave shelter to 15 people who needed it," Jack corrected. "What they wear on their backs doesn't change that they're human beings." "But you knew who they were," Jennifer pressed. "You knew the reputation. Weren't you worried?" Jack looked at where Ella was handing bottles of water to a group of firefighters, her small face serious and focused. He thought about the night before, about the decision to open his door, about the 4 words on his dog tag. "You know what worried me?" Jack said. "The idea of 15 people stuck in a tornado because I was too afraid to do the right thing. The idea of living the rest of my life knowing I'd let fear make me turn away from people who needed help. That worried me a hell of a lot more than some patches on a jacket. And now? Now they've proven what I already knew, that courage and compassion aren't about what you wear or what people think of you. They're about what you do when it matters." Jack looked directly at the camera. "These men are heroes. Every single one of them served this country in uniform. They're still serving, just in a different way. And anyone who can't see that because of a leather vest needs to take a hard look at their own prejudices." Jennifer smiled. "That's going to make a great soundbite. Thank you, Mr. Hale." As the afternoon wore on, more help arrived from surrounding counties. The National Guard showed up with heavy equipment and supplies. Red Cross set up a shelter at the high school. FEMA representatives began the preliminary damage assessments that would determine federal aid. And through it all, the Hells Angels kept working. No breaks longer than necessary, no complaints, no requests for recognition or reward. Jack found Ryder around 3 o'clock, sitting on the curb in front of what used to be the town pharmacy, his head in his hands and exhaustion written in every line of his body. "You should rest," Jack said, sitting down beside him. "Can't," Ryder replied without looking up. "Too much to do." "There's always going to be too much to do," Jack said. "But you've been going nonstop for almost 18 hours. You're running on fumes, brother." "So are you." "Yeah, but this is my town. My people. You don't owe us this." Ryder finally looked up, and his eyes were red-rimmed and exhausted, but also somehow bright with something that looked like purpose. "Yes, we do. You gave us shelter when nobody else would. You saw us as people when everyone else saw us as threats. That means something, Jack. That means everything." "You've more than repaid that debt," Jack said quietly. "It's not about debt," Ryder said. "It's about honor. It's about remembering who we used to be before the world told us we were worthless. You reminded us, Jack. Last night when you opened that door, you reminded 15 broken men that they still had value, that they still had something to offer. Do you have any idea what that means to someone who's been told for years that they're trash?" Jack didn't know what to say to that, so he just sat there in companionable silence, 2 veterans watching their respective families work to rebuild something that had been broken. "The media is going to make this a big story," Jack said eventually. "I know. Could bring a lot of attention to the club. Not all of it good." "I know that too," Ryder sighed. "But if it changes even one person's mind, if it makes even one scared parent look past the patches and see the people, then it's worth it." Movement caught Jack's attention. A group of townspeople were gathering in the street, maybe 40 or 50 of them. Many that Jack recognized from the crowd that had protested the bikers' presence just 14 hours ago. His stomach tightened. This could go bad quickly if the mood turned ugly. But then Charlie Preston stepped forward from the group, and Jack saw that the hardware store owner was carrying something, a handmade sign, rough but readable, painted on a piece of plywood salvaged from his destroyed store. Charlie held it up high enough for everyone to see. The words were simple but powerful. "Thank you, Hells Angels. We're sorry we judged you." One by one, other townspeople held up their own signs, hastily made but heartfelt. "You saved our town, veterans, brothers, heroes. We were wrong. Forgive us." The bikers stopped working, turning to look at this impromptu gathering. Jack saw Tommy's face crumple, saw the kid turn away quickly to hide tears, saw Brick, massive, intimidating Brick, remove his sunglasses and wipe his eyes with the back of his hand. Saw Carlos stand there with his mouth open, clearly not believing what he was seeing. Then Mrs. Henderson stepped forward from the crowd. The 73-year-old widow who'd run away in fear just yesterday moved with purpose toward where the bikers stood. She approached Ryder, looked up at this big, bearded, leather-clad man, and did something that made Jack's vision blur. She hugged him. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice carrying in the sudden silence. "I'm so sorry I was cruel. I'm sorry I called you names. I'm sorry I judged you without knowing you. You saved my life today. You saved all our lives. And I want you to know that Millbrook will never forget what you did for us." Ryder stood frozen for a moment, clearly not knowing how to respond. Then his arms came up slowly, and he returned the hug, this huge biker embracing a tiny elderly woman with the gentleness of someone holding something precious and fragile. "It's okay," Ryder said, his voice rough. "It's okay, ma'am. We understand." But Mrs. Henderson wasn't done. She pulled back and turned to the crowd. "All of you," she called out, "come here. Show these men that we're better than our fear." And they came. Charlie Preston first, shaking hands with every biker he could reach, apologizing over and over. James Henderson next, his mother beside him. Then more. The pastor, despite his injuries. Sarah Williams with tears streaming down her face. Teenagers who'd watched from windows. Children who'd been scared. Elderly residents who'd locked their doors. The townspeople of Millbrook came forward one by one and in groups, offering handshakes and hugs and apologies and thanks. They came despite their earlier fear, despite their prejudices, despite everything they'd believed about what the Hells Angels represented. They came because actions had spoken louder than words, because courage had overcome fear, because 15 men had shown them what honor really looked like. Jack stood apart from the crowd, Ella beside him, and watched something remarkable happen. He watched walls come down, watched barriers dissolve, watched human connection bridge a gap that had seemed unbridgeable just hours before. "Dad?" Ella tugged on his hand. "Why is everyone crying?" "Because sometimes," Jack said, his own eyes burning, "when people realize they've been wrong about something important, it hurts. But it's a good hurt. It's the hurt of becoming better than you were." Deputy Sanders approached them, his young face serious. "Mr. Hale, there's something you should see." He led them to the makeshift command post where Sheriff Morrison was standing with a tablet in his hands. On the screen was a news website, and the headline made Jack's breath catch. "Hells Angels Save Pennsylvania Town After Tornado." Below it was Jennifer Chase's report, already posted and apparently going viral. The video showed everything: the bikers working, the rescues, Jack's interview. But the centerpiece was footage of Mrs. Henderson's apology and what had followed, the whole town coming together to thank the men they'd feared. "It's everywhere," Morrison said quietly. CNN picked it up, Fox News, MSNBC. It's trending on every social media platform. The whole country's watching Millbrook right now. "Is that good or bad?" Jack asked. "I'm not sure yet," Morrison admitted. "But I think it's important. I think people need to see this. Need to see that courage and compassion can come from unexpected places. That honor isn't about what you wear or what people think of you. It's about what you do when it matters most." Jack realized the sheriff was quoting him, using the words from his interview. He felt his face heat with embarrassment. "I didn't mean to become the spokesperson for—" "Too late," Morrison interrupted with a slight smile. "You made a choice last night that's going to be talked about for a long time. Might as well own it." As the sun began to set on Millbrook's longest day, Jack found himself standing once again in the bay door opening of his shop. The building had held through the tornado, though it would need significant repairs. His livelihood was damaged, but not destroyed. His town was battered, but not broken. And his choice to open a door during a storm had somehow managed to open hearts and minds in ways he never could have predicted. Ryder approached, his crew gathering behind him. "We should probably head out soon," he said, "before we overstay our welcome." "You could never do that," Jack replied. "Stay as long as you need. The shop's still standing. You're still welcome." "We appreciate it, brother. But we've got people worried about us, families who've been trying to reach us since the storm hit. Once the cell service comes back up, we need to let them know we're okay." Ryder glanced back at his crew. "Plus, I think we've done what we came to do. We helped. We made a difference. That's enough." "It's more than enough," Jack said. You changed this town today, changed the people in it. That's not a small thing." "We didn't change them," Ryder corrected. "You did. By opening your door, by showing them that fear doesn't have to win. We just helped them see what you'd already proven." Ella emerged from the shop carrying something wrapped in newspaper. She walked up to Ryder with the same determination she'd shown the night before when bringing blankets to strangers. "Mr. Ryder," she said, "I made something for you." She handed him the newspaper-wrapped package. Ryder unwrapped it carefully and found a drawing, crayon and marker on printer paper, the kind of art that only a 10-year-old could produce, but that carried more emotional weight than any professional piece could manage. The drawing showed 15 motorcycles arranged in a circle around a building. Standing in the center was a stick figure of a little girl and a taller figure that was clearly meant to be Jack. And surrounding them all, drawn with careful detail, were angels. Not the cherubim kind, but leather-clad figures with wings sprouting from their backs and halos above their heads. At the bottom, in Ella's careful handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for being angels. Love, Ella." Ryder stared at the drawing for a long moment, his jaw working as he fought for composure. When he finally looked up, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Miss Ella," he said, his voice thick, "this is the most beautiful thing anyone's ever given me. I'm going to treasure this forever." "Really?" Ella asked, pleased. "Really," Ryder confirmed. He crouched down to her level. "Can I tell you something?" Ella nodded. "Before we came to your town, I'd forgotten what it felt like to be treated like I mattered, like I was more than my mistakes, more than the worst things I'd ever done. Your dad reminded me that I'm still human, still capable of good things, and you reminded me why that matters. So thank you, little one. Thank you for seeing angels instead of devils." He handed her something from his pocket, a patch from his vest, one of the many decorative ones that told the story of his years with the club. It showed a motorcycle with wings, and underneath were the words, "Forever Two Wheels." "This is for you," Ryder said, "to remember that people aren't always what they seem, that courage means looking past the surface, and that sometimes the best people come in unexpected packages." Ella took the patch like it was made of gold, her face glowing with joy. She threw her arms around Ryder's neck in an impulsive hug that made several of the other bikers turn away quickly, suddenly very interested in checking their motorcycles. As night fell completely and the emergency lighting cast everything in artificial brightness, the Hells Angels prepared to leave. Their bikes had survived the storm undamaged, protected by the same concrete walls that had sheltered their riders. They performed final checks, said last goodbyes, and prepared to return to roads that felt a little less lonely than they had the day before. Jack shook hands with each of them, accepting thanks he didn't feel he'd earned and giving thanks that felt inadequate for what these men had done. They'd given his town more than rescue and recovery. They'd given it a lesson in humanity that no sermon or lecture could have matched. Tommy was the last to leave. The young biker, still pale but no longer shaking, gripped Jack's hand hard. "You probably saved my life last night," Tommy said. "If we'd been out in that storm much longer, if we hadn't found shelter, I don't want to think about what would have happened." "You more than repaid that today," Jack assured him. "It's not about repayment," Tommy said, echoing what Ryder had said earlier. "It's about remembering who I am, who we all are. We're not the labels people put on us. We're the choices we make. You reminded us of that." The engines started with their characteristic rumble, 15 Harleys growling to life in the darkness. The sound that had caused panic just 24 hours ago now brought townspeople out of their damaged homes to watch and wave. Children who'd been pulled away from windows last night now stood on the sidewalk, awed by the sight of these unlikely heroes preparing to ride into the night. Ryder was the last to mount his bike. He looked at Jack for a long moment, then snapped a sharp salute. Marine to Marine, brother to brother. Jack returned it, feeling the weight of tradition and honor in the gesture. Then the Hells Angels pulled out, riding in formation through the disaster zone that had been downtown Millbrook, and everywhere they passed, people lined the streets, not to protest or fear, but to cheer, to wave, to show gratitude and respect in something that looked like love. Jack watched until the taillights disappeared into the darkness, until the sound of the engines faded to nothing. Ella leaned against his side, clutching both her stuffed rabbit and the patch Ryder had given her. "Dad?" she said sleepily. "Do you think we'll ever see them again?" "I don't know, baby," Jack admitted. "But I think we'll remember them forever, and I think they'll remember us. Because we were nice to them when no one else was?" "Because we saw them as people," Jack corrected gently. "That's all anyone really wants, to be seen, not judged, not feared, not labeled, just seen and accepted for who they really are." Ella yawned. I'm glad you opened the door, Dad. Me too, sweetheart, Jack said, looking at his damaged shop and his damaged town, and feeling, despite everything, a profound sense of rightness. Me too. The silence after the motorcycles left felt heavier than it should have, like the air itself was holding its breath waiting for what came next. Jack stood in the ruins of his bay door, opening for a long time after the last taillight disappeared, one arm around Ella's shoulders, feeling the exhaustion of the last 24 hours settling into his bones like concrete. The town around them hummed with the subdued activity of people too tired to do much but too wired to sleep. Emergency generators powering temporary lights, distant voices calling to each other in the darkness, the occasional vehicle navigating carefully through debris-strewn streets. "Come on, baby," Jack said finally, steering Ella back inside. "Let's see if we can make somewhere comfortable to sleep tonight." The shop's interior looked like a war zone, tracked mud and water everywhere, borrowed clothes scattered where the bikers had changed, empty coffee cups and soup cans littering every surface. But it was still standing, still structurally sound, and right now that felt like a miracle Jack didn't have the energy to fully appreciate. He made up a bed for Ella on the office couch using the blankets the bikers had returned before leaving, carefully folded, a small gesture of respect that had touched Jack more than he wanted to admit. She was asleep before he finished tucking her in, one hand clutching Mr. Whiskers, the other holding Ryder's patch like a talisman against bad dreams. Jack should have slept too. God knew he needed it. But his mind wouldn't stop replaying the last day in vivid detail. The decision to open the door, the tornado, the rescue at the church, the moment when Mrs. Henderson had hugged Ryder and broken something open in the town's collective heart. He kept thinking about the drawing Ella had made, about grown men crying over a child's crayon artwork, about what it meant that 15 people society had written off as dangerous had proven to be exactly the opposite. His phone buzzed suddenly, startling him. Cell service was back, apparently, at least intermittently. The screen showed 73 missed calls, 246 text messages, and notifications from social media platforms Jack barely remembered having accounts on. He scrolled through them with growing disbelief. Messages from high school friends he hadn't spoken to in 20 years. Emails from reporters requesting interviews. A voicemail from someone claiming to be a producer for a morning news show in New York. Text messages from former Marine Corps buddies he'd served with, half of them saying they'd seen the news coverage and weren't surprised Jack had done something like this. The other half asking if he'd lost his mind. And one message, time-stamped from 3 hours ago, that made his heart stop. It was from Sarah, his ex-wife, Ella's mother, the woman who'd walked away 2 years ago and hadn't looked back. "Saw the news. Is Ella okay? Call me." Jack stared at that message for a long time, feeling a complicated tangle of emotions he didn't have names for. Anger that she only reached out when the situation was dramatic enough to make national news. Relief that she'd reached out at all. Bitterness that concern for their daughter took a tornado to activate. Hope that maybe, just maybe, this meant something was changing. He didn't call. Couldn't, not right now with his emotions too raw and his exhaustion too complete. Instead, he sent back a simple text. "Ella's fine. We're both fine. Storm missed us. Shop damaged but repairable. Don't worry." He turned his phone off before she could respond, before this could turn into the kind of conversation that would keep him up all night and leave him feeling hollowed out. There would be time for that later. Right now, he needed to focus on what was in front of him, the immediate problems of shelter and safety, and figuring out how to rebuild. Sleep finally claimed him around 2 a.m, sitting in his desk chair with his head on his arms. It wasn't comfortable, and his back would hate him for it in the morning, but it was sleep, and that was enough. He woke to the sound of voices outside and pale morning light filtering through the gaps in his destroyed bay doors. For a moment, Jack couldn't remember where he was or why his back hurt so badly. Then it all came rushing back, the storm, the bikers, the rescue, everything. He groaned and sat up, his spine cracking in protest, and checked his watch. 7:30. He'd managed maybe 5 hours of broken sleep. The voices outside were getting louder, and now Jack could hear vehicles, multiple vehicles, heavy ones by the sound of it. He stumbled to the opening and looked out to find Main Street transformed overnight into something that looked like a combination construction site and military staging area. National Guard trucks were parked at regular intervals, soldiers in ACU patterns directing traffic and coordinating with local authorities. A mobile command center had been set up in the parking lot of what used to be the pharmacy. News vans with satellite dishes were clustered at the far end of the street, reporters doing stand-ups with the destruction as their backdrop. And everywhere, absolutely everywhere, people were working. The debris that had blocked the street yesterday was being loaded into dump trucks. Tarps were going up over damaged roofs. Construction crews with heavy equipment were clearing the most dangerous wreckage. FEMA representatives with clipboards were doing damage assessments. Red Cross volunteers were distributing water and food from a tent that hadn't been there when Jack fell asleep. "Mr. Hale," a voice made him turn. A young National Guard specialist stood at attention, looking uncertain. "Sir, Major Reynolds sent me to find you. He'd like to speak with you when you have a moment." "Give me 5 minutes," Jack said, suddenly very aware that he probably looked like hell, unshaven, covered in yesterday's dirt, wearing clothes he'd slept in. "Let me check on my daughter." Ella was still sleeping, curled into a tight ball with her stuffed rabbit. Jack didn't wake her. She'd earned the rest, earned whatever peace she could find after the chaos of yesterday. He quickly washed his face in the bathroom sink, changed into slightly less dirty clothes, and headed out to find whoever Major Reynolds was. The Major turned out to be a woman in her mid-40s with steel gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, and the kind of posture that screamed career military. She was standing outside the mobile command center with Sheriff Morrison, both of them studying a large map spread across the hood of a Humvee. "Mr. Hale," Morrison said when he spotted Jack. "Major Reynolds, this is the man I was telling you about." Reynolds extended her hand with a firm grip. "Staff Sergeant Hale, it's an honor. I've heard a lot about what happened here yesterday. Your actions were exemplary." "Just did what needed doing, ma'am," Jack replied, falling into the respectful formality that came automatically with military brass. "That's exactly the kind of attitude we need more of," Reynolds said. She gestured to the map. "We're coordinating the recovery effort. FEMA's already approved emergency funding. Army Corps of Engineers will be here this afternoon to assess infrastructure damage. But I wanted to talk to you specifically about something else." She pulled out a tablet and brought up a video. The news coverage from yesterday, Jack realized, showing the bikers working alongside townspeople, showing the rescue at the church, showing the emotional scene when Mrs. Henderson had apologized. "This," Reynolds said, "has created what we in crisis management call an opportunity. The story of what happened here has resonated nationally. People want to help. We've had offers pouring in, monetary donations, volunteer labor, supplies. But they're not just coming to help Millbrook. They're coming because of what you did, because of what those bikers did." "I don't understand what that has to do with me," Jack said slowly. "The governor's office has been in touch," Morrison interjected. "They want to make this a model recovery, showcase how a community can come together across differences, how veterans can lead the way in crisis response. They're talking about special recognition for you and the motorcycle club, possibly even a commendation ceremony." Jack felt his stomach tighten. "That's not necessary. We didn't do any of this for recognition." "I know that," Reynolds said. "That's exactly why it matters. But here's the reality, Mr. Hale. Whether you want it or not, you've become a symbol. A veteran who chose compassion over fear, who led by example, who reminded people that service doesn't end when you take off the uniform. That's powerful, and right now this town needs that power to rebuild." "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Jack asked carefully. "Be the liaison between the town and the recovery effort," Reynolds explained. "You know these people, you understand military structure and protocol, and you've proven you can make tough calls under pressure. Work with me to coordinate resources, help identify priorities, make sure the people who need help most get it first. It's temporary, a few weeks at most, and it's voluntary. But you'd be compensated, and it would free you up to focus on this instead of trying to keep your business running while everything else is chaos." Jack looked at Morrison, who nodded. "It's a good offer, Jack. And honestly, we need someone the townspeople trust. After yesterday, that's you." "I need to think about it," Jack said, his mind already spinning through implications. Ella needed stability, needed routine. His shop needed repairs he couldn't afford to delay. But the town needed help, needed coordination, needed someone who understood both the military efficiency of crisis response and the human needs of a community in trauma. Take the day, Reynolds said. But I need an answer by tomorrow morning. The recovery window is narrow. We need to move fast or risk losing momentum and resources. Jack spent the next hour walking through downtown, assessing damage with fresh eyes in the morning light. It was worse than he had realized in yesterday's chaos. At least a third of the buildings had sustained major damage. The infrastructure was devastated. Power lines down, water mains broken, gas leaks that had crews working overtime to contain. The economic impact would be staggering for a town Millbrook's size. But he also saw something else, signs of the transformation that had begun yesterday. The hardware store, despite being partially collapsed, had a hand-painted banner across the front. "We're still open. Come around back." Mrs. Henderson's antique shop had volunteers already sorting through salvageable inventory. The Presbyterian church, despite the destroyed sanctuary, had set up a community meal service under a tent in the parking lot. And everywhere, people who would have walked past each other without speaking just 2 days ago were working together. The country club set alongside working-class families, old-timers who'd lived in Millbrook for generations alongside newcomers who'd moved in within the last year. The crisis had cracked something open in the town's social structure, and people were tentatively reaching through that crack toward connection. "Jack!" Charlie Preston waved from where he was supervising the salvage of his inventory. The big man looked like he'd aged a decade, but there was purpose in his movements that hadn't been there before the storm. "Got a minute?" Jack detoured over, stepping carefully through the rubble. "How's it looking, Charlie?" "Bad," Charlie admitted. "Insurance will cover some of it, but I'm going to take a major hit. Might be 6 months before I can reopen properly." He paused, swallowing hard. "But I'm alive. My wife's alive. And I've been thinking a lot about yesterday, about how I treated those bikers, about the things I said about you for helping them." "Charlie, you don't have to—" "Yeah, I do," Charlie interrupted. "I was wrong, Jack. Not just a little wrong, completely, fundamentally wrong. I saw the leather and the patches and the reputation, and I decided I knew everything I needed to know. And then they saved Emma Williams's life. They saved Pastor Williams. They worked harder than anyone to help this town, and I'd called them criminals to their faces." "They understood," Jack said. "They're used to that reaction." "That's the problem, though, isn't it?" Charlie's voice carried an edge of self-directed anger. "They're used to being judged and rejected and treated like threats. And that's wrong. That's on us, on people like me who decided it was easier to fear than to understand." He looked at Jack directly. "I want to do better. I want to be better. But I don't know how." "You start by remembering yesterday," Jack said simply. "Remember how you felt when you realized you'd been wrong. Remember that feeling the next time you're tempted to judge someone based on appearances, and then you make a different choice." Charlie nodded slowly. "You make it sound simple." "It is simple," Jack replied. "Not easy, but simple. Every interaction is a choice, fear or compassion, judgment or understanding. You just have to decide which kind of person you want to be." Movement at the end of the street caught their attention. A convoy of vehicles was arriving, not military or emergency services, but civilian trucks and vans, at least a dozen of them. They pulled into the cleared parking area, and people began emerging with an organized purposefulness that suggested this wasn't a random group of volunteers. Jack felt his breath catch as he recognized the figure leading them. Ryder Jones, looking tired but determined, wearing his leather cut over a clean t-shirt. Behind him came the rest of the Hells Angels from yesterday, and behind them came more, at least 30 additional bikers, maybe more, some wearing matching cuts and others in civilian clothes, but all moving with the same sense of mission. "We came back," Ryder called out when he spotted Jack. His voice carried across the street, making heads turn. "Couldn't stay away. Figured you might need some help with the heavy lifting." Jack walked toward him in a daze, aware of the townspeople gathering, aware of cameras suddenly pointing in their direction, aware that this moment was going to be significant in ways he couldn't fully predict. "You didn't have to come back," Jack said when he reached Ryder. "Yeah, we did," Ryder replied. "Called in favors from other chapters. Hells Angels from Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Philadelphia. Called some other clubs too. Brothers who understand what it means to be judged by patches instead of actions. Word got out about what happened here, about how this town overcame their fear and showed us respect. That matters, Jack. That matters to a lot of people who've been told they don't matter. Tommy stepped forward from the group, looking healthier than he had yesterday, his young face split by a wide grin. Plus, we brought supplies. Building materials, tools, generators, food, water, everything we could gather in 12 hours. Clubs all over the Northeast contributed. We've got enough to make a real difference. Brick emerged from one of the trucks carrying a massive toolbox like it weighed nothing. Where do you need us, Jack? Jack looked at these men who'd come back, who'd brought reinforcements, who'd somehow managed to organize a major relief effort overnight. He looked at the townspeople watching with expressions ranging from amazement to gratitude to lingering uncertainty. He looked at Major Reynolds, who'd appeared from the command center with an expression that suggested she was rapidly recalculating her assessment of the situation. Everywhere, Jack said finally. We need help everywhere. What followed was organized chaos that somehow managed to be more organized than chaotic. Reynolds, after a brief consultation with her staff in Morrison, officially incorporated the motorcycle clubs into the recovery effort. The bikers were divided into work crews based on skills: construction, electrical, plumbing, general labor. They coordinated with National Guard units, with local contractors, with volunteer groups that were arriving from surrounding communities. And they worked with an intensity that left everyone else scrambling to keep up. These were men who'd spent yesterday proving they had value. Today, they were reinforcing that proof with every nail hammered, every board lifted, every hour of backbreaking labor freely given. They weren't trying to change minds anymore. They were simply being who they'd always been beneath the patches and the prejudice. Good men doing good work. Jack found himself drafted into exactly what Reynolds had proposed: liaison and coordinator, the bridge between military efficiency and community needs. He moved between work sites, identified priorities, solved problems, and generally made himself useful in ways he hadn't realized he was capable of. It felt good, felt purposeful in a way his regular work sometimes didn't. This wasn't just fixing engines or replacing brake pads. This was rebuilding lives. Around noon, a sleek black SUV pulled into town with government plates and an air of importance that made everyone take notice. The governor emerged, a polished politician in his 50s who'd built his career on being everywhere important during crisis moments. He was accompanied by aides, security, and what looked like his own media team. "This is going to be a circus," Morrison muttered to Jack as they watched the governor glad hand his way through the crowd, stopping for photos with volunteers and victims alike. The governor eventually made his way to where Jack and Ryder were coordinating the work on Oak Street. Up close, he had the practiced warmth of someone who'd spent decades in public life, but his eyes were sharp and calculating. "You must be Jack Hale," the governor said, extending his hand. "Governor Mitchell. I've been very impressed by what I've seen here, the community response, the volunteer effort, the way different groups have come together. This is Pennsylvania at its best." "Governor," Jack acknowledged neutrally, shaking the offered hand. Mitchell turned to Ryder. "And you're Sergeant Jones, if I'm not mistaken, the Marine who organized this remarkable relief effort." "Just helping out, Governor," Ryder said. His voice was carefully respectful, but carried an undercurrent of wariness. Men like them had learned not to trust politicians who showed up with cameras after the hard work was already done. "Well, your help has been extraordinary," Mitchell said. He lowered his voice slightly, though not so much that the cameras couldn't still pick up his words. "I want to do something to recognize what you've done here, both of you, and the men who've worked so tirelessly. I'm thinking a formal commendation ceremony, possibly at the state capitol. Show the nation that Pennsylvania values service and community, regardless of background." "That's not necessary," Jack said immediately. "We didn't do this for recognition," Ryder added. "I know that," Mitchell replied smoothly. "But sometimes recognition serves a larger purpose. It sends a message about inclusivity, about second chances, about how we treat veterans. That message matters, gentlemen. And right now, in this political climate, positive messages about unity are in short supply." Jack exchanged a glance with Ryder, seeing his own skepticism reflected back. This wasn't about them or the town. It was about optics, about a politician seizing an opportunity to look good during an election year. "We'll think about it," Jack said, "because refusing outright would create more problems than it solved." "That's all I ask," Mitchell said. He turned to his aide. "Make sure we get photos with both of them, and some of the volunteers. I want to emphasize the bipartisan, cross-community aspect of this response. As the governor moved away to continue his tour, Ryder let out a long breath. "Politician," he said with distaste. "Same in every state, every era. Only care about people when there's a camera pointed at them." "Maybe," Jack said. "Or maybe sometimes their motives don't matter if the outcome is still positive. If a commendation ceremony gets more resources for Millbrook, if it changes even one person's mind about motorcycle clubs, then does it matter if the governor's motivations are selfish?" "Spoken like someone who still has ideals," Ryder said, but there was affection in his voice. "Don't ever lose that, Jack. World needs people who can still see the good." The afternoon brought more developments that felt increasingly surreal. A major construction company announced they were donating materials and labor for the rebuilding effort. Their CEO had seen the news coverage and been moved by the story of community overcoming prejudice. A veterans organization pledged funding for repairs to any veteran-owned business damaged in the storm. 3 different churches from surrounding counties arrived with food, supplies, and volunteers. And the donations kept pouring in online. A GoFundMe. Someone had started for Millbrook's recovery had raised over $200,000 in less than 24 hours. The money was real, the help was tangible, and all of it traced back to a single decision to open a door during a storm. Jack was coordinating a work crew at the church when Ella found him, accompanied by Deputy Sanders. His daughter looked small and worried, clutching Mr. Whiskers to her chest. "Dad, there's a lady here," Ella said quietly. "She says she's my mom." Jack's world tilted sideways. He looked past Ella to where a rental car was parked on the street, and there she was, Sarah, his ex-wife, Ella's mother. She looked the same and different simultaneously. Same blonde hair and blue eyes, but thinner, more polished, wearing clothes that spoke of the successful California life she'd built away from them. "I'll handle the crew," Ryder said quietly, reading the situation instantly. "Take your time." Jack walked towards Sarah with Ella's small hand in his, feeling like he was moving through water, like reality had become something thick and resistant. They met in the middle of the street. This woman he'd loved and married and divorced. This woman who'd given him the greatest gift of his life and then walked away from both of them. "Jack," Sarah said. Her voice was exactly as he remembered, soft, slightly hesitant, carrying California vowels that hadn't been there when they'd met. "I had to come. I saw the news and I couldn't just sit there and—" "We're fine," Jack interrupted. "I told you in my text, we're both fine." "I can see that," Sarah said. She crouched down to Ella's level, her face softening with an emotion that looked genuine. "Hi, baby. I've missed you so much." Ella didn't move forward, didn't run into her mother's arms the way she might have 2 years ago. Instead, she stayed pressed against Jack's leg, her expression guarded in a way that broke his heart because children shouldn't have to guard themselves against their own parents. "Hi, Mom," Ella said quietly. Sarah's face crumpled slightly at that lukewarm reception, but she held herself together. "Can we talk?" she asked Jack. "Please, just for a few minutes?" Jack wanted to say no, wanted to send her away before she could disrupt the fragile stability he'd built for Ella, before she could promise things she wouldn't deliver and break their daughter's heart again. But Ella was watching him, and he knew this moment would teach her something about how adults handle difficult situations. "Ella, go find Mr. Ryder," Jack said gently. "Stay where I can see you, okay?" Ella nodded and ran off toward where Ryder was directing the work crew. Jack watched until he was sure she was safely occupied, then turned back to Sarah. "What are you doing here, Yeek?" he asked, keeping his voice neutral. "I told you. I saw the news. A tornado, Jack. Our daughter was in a tornado and I was 2,000 miles away drinking wine at a networking event when it happened." Sarah's voice cracked. "I got on the first flight I could book." "That's not an answer to my question," Jack pressed. "You haven't called in 6 months. You missed Ella's birthday, missed her school play, missed everything. You don't get to swoop in now because a news story made you feel guilty." "You think I don't know that?" Sarah shot back, tears starting to flow. "You think I don't know what a terrible mother I've been? I know, Jack, I know, and I hate myself for it, but I can't change the past. I can only try to do better now." "Why?" Jack demanded. "Why now? Why this crisis? Why not any of the 100 other moments when Ella needed her mother? Sarah wiped her eyes, smearing mascara. Because seeing you on the news, seeing what you did, how you opened your shop to those bikers when everyone else was afraid, reminded me of why I fell in love with you. You've always been brave, always been willing to do the hard right thing instead of the easy wrong thing. And I realized that I've spent 2 years doing the opposite, taking the easy path, avoiding the hard conversations, pretending I could build a new life by just forgetting the old one. And you think one visit fixes that? Jack asked. You think showing up during a disaster makes up for 2 years of absence? No, Sarah said simply. I don't think that, but I want to try. I want to be part of Ella's life again, if she'll let me. If you'll let me. I know I have to earn that. I know I have to prove I've changed, but I can't do that if I stay in California pretending this part of my life doesn't exist. Jack looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something he hadn't expected. Genuine remorse, real pain, the kind of self-awareness that only came from honest introspection. It didn't excuse what she'd done, didn't erase the hurt she'd caused, but it suggested that maybe, just maybe, people could change. I need to think about this, Jack said finally. And more importantly, Ella needs to think about it. She's the one you hurt most. She's the one who gets to decide if she wants you back in her life. I understand, Sarah said. She looked past Jack to where Ella was helping hand tools to the work crew, her small face serious and focused. She's grown so much. I've missed so much. Yeah, Jack agreed, you have. Sarah started to say something else, but movement behind Jack made them both turn. Ryder was approaching, his expression carefully neutral but his body language protective. Sorry to interrupt, Ryder said, but we've got a situation that needs Jack's input. Foundation issue at one of the buildings on Pine Street. It was almost certainly not urgent enough to interrupt a personal conversation, which meant Ryder was giving Jack an out, a way to end this interaction before it became more complicated. Jack felt a surge of gratitude for this man who barely knew him but who'd stepped up to protect him anyway. I need to go, Jack told Sarah. There's a lot of work to do here. Can I stay? Sarah asked. Help with the recovery effort? I took a week off work. I don't have anywhere else to be. Jack wanted to say no, wanted to protect Ella from the possibility of further disappointment, but he thought about what he'd told Charlie Preston earlier, about making choices between fear and compassion, about deciding what kind of person you wanted to be. Fine, he said. You can stay. But you're here as a volunteer, not as Ella's mother. You haven't earned that title back yet. You're just Sarah, another pair of hands helping. If Ella decides she wants to talk to you, that's her choice. If she doesn't, you respect that. Clear? Clear, Sarah agreed quickly. Thank you, Jack. I won't let you down. Don't tell me, Jack said. Show me. Show Ella. Words don't mean much after 2 years of silence. He walked away with Ryder, leaving Sarah standing in the street surrounded by the destruction and the recovery. Part of him wondered if he'd made a mistake, if he'd just opened another door without knowing what might come through it. But the larger part, the part that had learned something important over the last 2 days, recognized that courage meant accepting uncertainty, meant giving people the chance to surprise you. Ex-wife? Ryder asked as they walked. Yeah, Jack confirmed. Left 2 years ago. This is the first time she's been back. That's complicated, Ryder observed. Everything's complicated, Jack replied. I'm just trying to make the best choices I can with incomplete information. Brother, Ryder said with a slight smile, that's the definition of life. None of us ever have all the information. We just do the best we can and hope it works out. The foundation issue on Pine Street turned out to be real. A house that looked intact on the outside, but had significant structural damage that made it unsafe for habitation. Jack helped coordinate the evacuation of the family living there, arranged for emergency shelter, and added the building to the growing list of structures that needed immediate professional attention. By the time he finished, it was late afternoon and his body was reminding him that he'd had about 5 hours of sleep in the last 48 hours. He was contemplating whether he could sneak away for a quick nap, when Morrison found him with news that made sleep seem even less likely. Jack, we've got media requests piling up, the sheriff said. Major networks want interviews. You, Ryder, some of the townspeople. The governor's office is pushing for that commendation ceremony. And there's a documentary crew asking permission to film the recovery effort with you and the bikers as the central story. No, Jack said immediately. Absolutely not. I'm not interested in being anyone's story. I figured you'd say that, Morrison replied. But here's the thing. This attention is bringing in resources we desperately need. That construction company that donated materials, they saw the evening news, the veterans organization that pledged funding. They saw the morning shows. Like it or not, your story is helping Millbrook recover faster than we could have managed on our own. So what are you saying? Jack asked. That I have an obligation to be a public figure now? I'm saying you have a choice to make, Morrison said carefully. You can refuse all the interview requests, turn down the commendation ceremony, go back to being a private citizen. That's your right, and nobody would blame you for it. But if you do that, we lose momentum. The news cycle moves on, the donations slow down, and Millbrook's recovery takes longer and costs more. That's not fair, Jack protested. No, Morrison agreed. It's not, but it's reality. You made a choice that turned into something bigger than anyone expected. Now you're stuck dealing with the consequences, good and bad. Jack looked around at the town he'd lived in for most of his life, at the destruction that would take months to fully repair, at the people who were depending on resources that seemed to flow most readily when cameras were pointed in their direction. He thought about Ella, about the kind of example he was setting, about what it meant to see something through once you'd started it. One interview, he said finally. One commendation ceremony if it's quick and doesn't turn into a political circus. But I'm not becoming the poster boy for anything. And Ryder and his crew get equal billing. This story doesn't work if it's just about me. Fair enough, Morrison said. I'll coordinate with Reynolds and the governor's office. We'll try to keep it contained. That evening, as the sun set on Millbrook's second day of recovery, Jack found himself sitting on the curb in front of his shop with Ella on one side and Ryder on the other. The street was quieter now. Work crews had broken for dinner, volunteers were settling into temporary housing, and the controlled chaos of the day had given way to exhausted stillness. Sarah sat nearby, but not too close, respecting the boundaries Jack had set. She'd spent the day working with a food distribution team, handing out meals and supplies to affected families. To her credit, she hadn't pushed for more interaction with Ella, hadn't tried to force a reunion that their daughter clearly wasn't ready for. She'd just been present, working, showing through actions instead of words. Dad? Ella said quietly. Why did Mom really come back? It was the question Jack had been dreading, the one he didn't have a good answer for because he wasn't entirely sure himself. But Ella deserved honesty, even when honesty was complicated. I think, Jack said carefully, she came back because she realized she'd made a mistake. People do that sometimes, make choices they regret, and then they have to figure out how to fix what they broke. But can you fix it? Ella asked. If you break something really bad, can you really put it back together? Jack looked at the town around them, at buildings being shored up, at structures being stabilized, at destruction being slowly transformed into reconstruction. Sometimes, he said, not always, and never exactly the same as before, but sometimes you can build something new that's still good, still valuable, even if it's different than what you had originally. Is that what Mom's trying to do? Ella asked. Build something new? I think so, Jack replied, but that's up to her to prove and up to you to decide if you want to let her try. Ella was quiet for a long moment, processing this with the seriousness that only children brought to big emotional questions. Finally, she said, I want to be brave like you, Dad. Like you were when you opened the door for the bikers. But I don't know if I'm brave enough to let Mom back in. Baby, Jack said, pulling her close, being brave doesn't mean you're not scared or hurt. It means you're honest about how you feel, and you make the choice that feels right to you, not the choice other people want you to make. Whatever you decide about your mom, whether you want to give her another chance or whether you need more time, that's okay. There's no wrong answer here. Ryder had been quiet through this exchange, but now he spoke up. Can I tell you something, Miss Ella? Ella nodded. I made a lot of mistakes in my life, Ryder said. Did things I'm not proud of, hurt people I loved, became someone I didn't recognize. And for a long time I thought that was just who I was. Broken, unfixable, not worth saving. But then people like your dad gave me chances I didn't deserve. They saw past the mistakes to the person I could still be. and that changed everything. So maybe your mom is broken too, and maybe she's made mistakes she can't undo. But people can change if someone gives them the chance. It doesn't mean you have to be the one to give that chance, but it means the possibility exists if you decide that's what you want. Ella looked at Ryder with the intensity that only children managed, like she was looking straight into his soul. Did you change because people were nice to you? Partly, Ryder admitted. But mostly I changed because I decided I wanted to be someone different than who I'd been. The people being nice just made that decision feel possible instead of impossible. So Mom has to decide to change, Ella said, working through the logic, and then I have to decide if I believe her. That's about right, Ryder confirmed. Ella thought about this for a moment longer, then slid off the curb and walked over to where Sarah sat. Jack's heart clenched, uncertain what was about to happen. He started to stand, to intervene, but Ryder put a hand on his arm. Let her, Ryder said quietly. She needs to do this her way. Ella stood in front of her mother, small and serious and heartbreakingly brave. Did you leave because of me? She asked. Sarah's face crumpled. Oh, baby, no, never because of you. I left because I was scared and selfish and I couldn't handle how hard everything was. But that was about me being weak, not about you being anything less than perfect. Are you still scared? Ella asked. Terrified, Sarah admitted. But I'm trying to be brave now, trying to do the hard thing instead of the easy thing. Okay, Ella said. And then, in a gesture that made Jack's eyes burn, she extended her hand to her mother. Not a hug, not forgiveness, but the beginning of a possibility. You can help me bring water to the workers, but you have to actually help. You can't just pretend and then leave again. I'll help, Sarah promised, taking Ella's small hand in both of hers like it was something precious and fragile. I'll really help. They walked away together toward the volunteer station, and Jack watched them go with emotions so tangled he couldn't begin to sort them. Relief, fear, hope, anger, love, all of it mixed together into something that hurt and healed simultaneously. Your kid's got more wisdom than most adults, Ryder observed. Yeah, Jack agreed. She does. I don't know where she gets it, but I'm grateful for it. She gets it from you, Ryder said, from watching you make brave choices even when they're hard. That's what kids learn. Not from what we say, but from what we do when it matters. As night fell completely and the temporary lights flickered on across Millbrook, Jack allowed himself a moment to just sit and breathe. The town was damaged but not destroyed. His daughter was hurting but also healing. His ex-wife was back but on probationary terms. The Hells Angels had returned and brought an army of support with them. And tomorrow would bring more challenges, more media attention, more complicated decisions. But tonight, right now, in this moment, Jack Hale felt something he'd been missing for a long time. He felt like maybe, just maybe, doing the right thing actually mattered. That opening doors instead of locking them, choosing compassion instead of fear, seeing people instead of labels. Maybe all of that actually made a difference in the world. Thank you, Jack said to Ryder, for coming back, for bringing help, for everything. Brother, Ryder replied, I think we're past thank yous. We're family now, not the kind you're born into, but the kind you choose, the kind that matters. And sitting there on a curb in a broken town being rebuilt by unlikely heroes, Jack thought that maybe Ryder was right. Maybe family wasn't just about blood or marriage licenses or legal documents. Maybe it was about showing up when it mattered, about doing the hard work of caring, about choosing each other day after day, even when it wasn't easy. Maybe that was the real lesson of these impossible 2 days, that in the end, we're all just people trying our best, and the bravest thing we can do is recognize our shared humanity and act accordingly. The story was far from over. There would be more challenges tomorrow, more decisions to make, more consequences to face. But for tonight, in this moment, Jack chose to believe that opening one door during a storm had somehow managed to open many more. Doors between people who'd been separated by fear and prejudice. Doors between past and future. Doors between who we've been and who we might become. And through those open doors, something new was being built. Something better. Something worth fighting for. The next morning arrived with the kind of clarity that only comes after storms. The sky scrubbed clean and impossibly blue, the air sharp with the scent of torn wood and earth turned inside out. Jack woke in his office chair again, his neck protesting the angle he'd slept at, and found Ella already awake and dressed, sitting at his desk drawing with the concentrated intensity she brought to everything she did. "Morning, baby," Jack said, his voice rough with sleep. "How long you been up?" "A while," Ella replied without looking up from her drawing. "I couldn't sleep anymore. My brain keeps thinking about too many things." Jack moved to stand behind her, looking over her shoulder at what she was creating. It was another picture of the motorcycles, but this time the drawing included more detail. The individual bikers with their different faces, the townspeople working alongside them, and in the center, a small figure that was clearly Ella herself, holding hands with two taller figures. One was obviously Jack. The other, Jack realized with a jolt, was Sarah. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," Jack said carefully. "You want to talk about what you're thinking?" Ella set down her crayon and turned to face him, her young face serious in a way that made her look older than her 10 years. "I'm thinking about Mom, about whether people really can change or if they just say they will and then don't." It was a question Jack had been asking himself since Sarah appeared yesterday, a question he didn't have a good answer to because the truth was complicated and painful and not the kind of thing you could explain easily to a child who'd already been hurt too much. "I think," Jack said slowly, sitting down so he was at her eye level, "that people can change, but only if they really want to. And the only way to know if someone really wants to change is to watch what they do, not what they say. Words are easy, actions are hard." "So I should watch what Mom does?" Ella asked. Yeah," Jack confirmed. "Watch what she does. See if her actions match her words. And then you decide, not me, not anyone else. You get to decide if you want to let her back into your life and how much you want to let her in." "What if I decide wrong?" Ella's voice was small, frightened. "What if I give her another chance and she leaves again?" Jack pulled his daughter into his arms, holding her close and wishing he could protect her from every hurt the world might throw at her. But he couldn't, and trying to would only make her less prepared for the inevitable pain that came with being human. "Then you'll hurt," Jack said honestly, "and it'll be bad. And you'll cry, and it'll feel like the end of the world. But you'll also know that you were brave enough to try, brave enough to give someone a second chance, even when it scared you. And that matters, Ella. That says something important about who you are." "What does it say?" Ella asked, her face pressed against his chest. "That you're the kind of person who leads with love instead of fear," Jack replied. "That you're stronger than the things that have hurt you. That you're exactly the person I raised you to be." Ella was quiet for a moment, then pulled back to look at him. "Okay, I'll watch what she does. But Dad, if she leaves again, you have to promise you won't be sad." "Baby, I can't promise that," Jack said gently. "If your mom leaves again, I'll be sad because you'll be sad. But I promise I'll be here no matter what. I'm not going anywhere. You're stuck with me." "Good," Ella said, and the relief in her voice made Jack's heart ache. "Because you're the best dad in the whole world, and I don't want a different one." "Well, you're the best daughter in the whole world, so I guess we're stuck with each other," Jack replied, tickling her until she giggled. It felt good to hear her laugh, felt like maybe despite everything, they were going to be okay. The sound of vehicles outside interrupted the moment. Jack looked out to see the street already filling with workers, the bikers returning for another day of labor, National Guard troops organizing equipment, volunteers arriving in cars and vans with supplies and willing hands. The recovery effort was ramping up again, and with it came the weight of expectations Jack still wasn't sure he wanted to carry. "Come on," Jack said to Ella. "Let's get some breakfast and see what today brings." They emerged from the shop to find organized chaos that was somehow more organized than yesterday. Someone had set up a proper command center with tables, maps, and communication equipment. Coffee and donuts were available at a volunteer station that hadn't existed 12 hours ago. And everywhere Jack looked, people were working with purpose and coordination that suggested the recovery effort had found its rhythm. Ryder was at the command center with Major Reynolds, both of them studying a large map covered in colored markers. He looked up when Jack approached, and despite the obvious exhaustion on his face, he was smiling. "Morning, brother," Ryder called. "Sleep okay?" "Define okay," Jack replied. "What's all this?" Reynolds answered before Ryder could. "Coordinated recovery plan. We've assessed all the major damage, prioritized repairs based on safety and utility, and assigned work crews to each site. The bikers are handling most of the heavy construction since they've got the skills and the manpower. National Guard is focused on infrastructure, power, water, gas. Volunteers are doing the lighter work, cleanup, sorting, food distribution. It's actually impressive, Ryder added. Turns out when you get military efficiency and biker brotherhood working together, you can accomplish things pretty fast. Jack studied the map, seeing his town reduced to colored zones and priority markers. Red for critical damage, yellow for moderate, green for minor. Too much red. But the yellow and green areas suggested that Millbrook wasn't as destroyed as it had felt in the immediate aftermath. "Where do you need me?" Jack asked. "Actually, you've got a different assignment today," Reynolds said. She handed him a printed schedule that made his stomach sink. Governor's office finalized the commendation ceremony. It's at 2 this afternoon at the high school gym. You, Ryder, and selected representatives from the motorcycle clubs. There will be media, probably protesters. Some people aren't happy about the state honoring an outlaw motorcycle club, and definitely political speeches. I need you there. I agreed to one ceremony, Jack said, not to become a political prop. I know, Reynolds replied, her voice sympathetic. But here's the reality. The governor is announcing a $10 million disaster relief package for Millbrook during that ceremony. $10 million, Jack. That's infrastructure repairs, business loans, housing assistance. It's the difference between this town recovering in 6 months versus 2 years. He wants to make a big show of unity and community spirit, and you and the bikers are the centerpiece of that show. So we smile for the cameras, and he gets his photo op, Ryder said flatly, and Millbrook gets the money it needs. That about sum it up? Yes, Reynolds admitted. I'm not going to pretend this is about anything other than optics. But sometimes optics serve a purpose beyond politics. This story, what happened here, how you all came together, it's resonating nationally. It's changing conversations about veterans, about motorcycle clubs, about how we treat people who look different than us. That matters. Jack looked at Ryder, seeing his own frustration reflected back. Neither of them had asked for this. Neither of them wanted to be symbols or spokespeople or examples of anything. They'd just done what seemed right in the moment, and now that moment had snowballed into something neither of them could control. We do this ceremony, Jack said finally, and then we're done. No more interviews, no documentary crews, no political events. We get Millbrook the resources it needs, and then everyone leaves us alone. Deal? Deal, Reynolds agreed quickly. I'll make sure the governor's office understands that today is it. And we have final say on what's said about the club, Ryder added. I don't want anyone spinning this into something it's not, or making promises about motorcycle club reform that we never agreed to. Understood, Reynolds said. You'll have a chance to review the governor's speech before he delivers it. They spent the next few hours preparing for a ceremony neither of them wanted. Jack showered for the first time in 2 days, changed into the only dress clothes he owned, khakis and a button-down shirt that had seen better days, and tried to mentally prepare himself for being the center of attention. Ella insisted on coming, wearing her best dress and carrying both Mr. Whiskers and the patch Ryder had given her like they were magical talismans. Sarah appeared as they were getting ready to leave, looking nervous and uncertain. Can I come? She asked Jack quietly. To the ceremony? I'd like to be there to support Ella, and you. Jack wanted to say no, wanted to keep this complicated enough without adding his ex-wife to the mix. But Ella was watching him, and he remembered what he'd told her about watching actions instead of listening to words. If Sarah was really trying to change, really trying to be present, then showing up mattered. Fine, Jack said. But you're there as a spectator, not as family. Let's be clear about that. Crystal clear, Sarah agreed. Thank you, Jack. The high school gym had been transformed into something that looked like a bizarre combination of political rally and awards ceremony. Bleachers were filled with townspeople, media cameras lined the back wall, and a stage had been erected at one end with a podium bearing the state seal. American flags flanked the stage, and a banner behind the podium read, "Pennsylvania Stands Together." Jack felt his stomach churn as they entered. This was too much, too public, too everything. He saw reporters pointing cameras in his direction, saw people in the crowd recognizing him and Ella. Ryder and the other bikers were already there, looking equally uncomfortable in their leather cuts, standing together in a tight group that spoke of mutual support in enemy territory. "Mr. Hale?" A young aide with a clipboard materialized at Jack's elbow. "Thank goodness you're here. You'll be seated on stage with Sergeant Jones and the governor. Your daughter can sit in the front row with the other family members." "She stays with me," Jack said firmly. "Wherever I go, she goes." The aide looked flustered. "Sir, the staging is very specific." "Then change it," Jack interrupted, "because I'm not going up there without my daughter." The aide scurried off to confer with someone more important, and Jack felt a hand on his shoulder. Ryder stood there with Tommy and Brick beside him, all three of them looking like they were heading into combat rather than a ceremony. "You ready for this circus?" Ryder asked. "Not even a little bit," Jack admitted. "Yeah, me neither," Ryder said, but we do it together, right? That's how brothers operate." "Together," Jack agreed. They were eventually ushered to the stage where chairs had been hastily rearranged to accommodate Ella. She sat between Jack and Ryder, small and serious, her eyes wide as she took in the crowd. Sarah sat in the front row where the families had been assigned, her face a mixture of pride and regret as she watched her daughter on stage. Governor Mitchell arrived with the fanfare of someone who knew how to make an entrance, surrounded by aides and security, and followed by cameras capturing his every move. He worked the room like a professional, shaking hands and taking photos, his smile never wavering even though his eyes remained calculating. When he finally took the podium, the gym fell silent. Mitchell was a practiced speaker, and his voice carried easily through the space without needing the microphone. "My fellow Pennsylvanians," he began, "we gather today in the aftermath of tragedy to celebrate the very best of what makes our Commonwealth great. 3 days ago, a catastrophic tornado struck this community. Lives were disrupted, property was destroyed, and the town of Millbrook faced its darkest hour." Jack listened to the governor paint a picture of devastation and heroism that was both accurate and somehow sanitized, the rough edges of reality smoothed into something more palatable for public consumption. He talked about community resilience and the American spirit and a dozen other phrases that sounded good but felt empty. "But in that darkness," Mitchell continued, "light emerged in the most unexpected form. When 15 members of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club sought shelter from the storm, they were met not with fear, but with compassion. Jack Hale, a decorated Marine veteran and small business owner, made a choice that would change this town forever. He opened his door. The crowd applauded, and Jack felt his face heat with embarrassment. This was exactly what he'd been afraid of, being turned into a symbol, having a complex decision reduced to a soundbite, being held up as an example when all he'd done was what any decent person should do. Mitchell went on detailing the rescue efforts, the bikers' return with reinforcements, the way the community had come together. He made it sound inspiring and patriotic and healing, which Jack supposed it was, but it was also messy and complicated and born of fear and prejudice being confronted head-on. "Today," Mitchell said, building to his conclusion, "I'm honored to announce a $10 million disaster relief package for Millbrook. This funding will help rebuild infrastructure, support local businesses, and ensure that this community emerges stronger than before." The crowd erupted in applause, people rising to their feet, the noise overwhelming in the enclosed space. Jack saw tears on faces throughout the gym, saw relief and gratitude and hope. $10 million was real help, was the difference between survival and thriving, and whatever Jack's feelings about being used for political purposes, he couldn't deny that this result mattered. "But money alone doesn't rebuild communities," Mitchell continued once the applause died down. "It takes courage, the courage to see past our differences and prejudices, to recognize our shared humanity, to choose compassion over fear." That courage was demonstrated by Jack Hale and by Sergeant Ryder Jones, and by every person who participated in this remarkable recovery effort. Mitchell gestured for Jack and Ryder to join him at the podium. Jack stood reluctantly, keeping one hand on Ella's shoulder to keep her close. Ryder moved with the same obvious reluctance, both of them walking towards something they'd never asked for. The governor presented them each with a commendation, official-looking certificates in frames bearing the state seal and flowery language about service and leadership and community spirit. Jack accepted his with a tight smile, feeling like a fraud because nothing about what he'd done felt commendation-worthy. He'd just been trying to help people. "Jack," Mitchell said, turning to address him directly while the cameras rolled. Would you like to say a few words? It wasn't really a question, not with 500 people watching and cameras broadcasting who knew where. Jack looked at Ryder, who gave him a slight nod that might have been encouragement or resignation. Then he looked down at Ella, who smiled up at him with complete confidence that her dad would know exactly what to say. Jack stepped to the microphone, his heart hammering, and looked out at the crowd. He saw familiar faces. Charlie Preston and Mrs. Henderson, Pastor Williams with his arm in a sling, Deputy Sanders, dozens of people he'd known his entire life. He saw strangers too, reporters and volunteers, and people who'd come to witness this moment. And he saw the bikers standing together to one side, these men who'd been feared and rejected and who'd responded with grace and service. I don't really do speeches, Jack began, his voice rough. I'm a mechanic, not a politician, but I guess I should say something since you're all here. A ripple of laughter went through the crowd, some of the tension easing. 3 nights ago, I made a decision to let 15 strangers into my shop during a storm, Jack continued. People tell me it was brave or noble or compassionate, but honestly, it just felt like the only choice I could live with. I looked at those men standing in the rain, and I saw people who needed help. Everything else, the patches, the reputation, the fear, that was just noise. And I decided a long time ago that I wouldn't let noise determine who I was or how I treated people. He paused, gathering his thoughts, aware that whatever he said next would probably be repeated and analyzed and remembered. We live in a world that tells us to be afraid all the time, afraid of people who look different, who dress different, who live different than we do. We're told that safety comes from walls and locks and keeping strangers at arm's length. And sometimes, yeah, caution is smart. But somewhere along the way, we forgot that the greatest danger isn't the stranger at your door. It's the fear that keeps you from ever opening it. Jack saw heads nodding throughout the crowd, saw people leaning forward to hear better. These men, he gestured to the bikers, saved this town. Not because they owed us anything, we'd treated them like criminals before we knew their names. They saved us because that's who they are beneath the leather and the patches. They're veterans. They're fathers and sons and brothers. They're people who understand that service doesn't end when you take off a uniform. That honor means showing up even when you're not wanted. That brotherhood means you help because it's right, not because it's easy. Ryder was staring at the floor, but Jack could see his jaw working with emotion. Several of the other bikers were openly crying, these hard men reduced to tears by being seen and acknowledged. Millbrook learned something important these last few days, Jack said. We learned that we're capable of being better than our fear. We learned that courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing the right thing even when you are scared. And we learned that the people we're taught to fear might just be the ones who save us when we need it most. He looked directly at the governor, making sure Mitchell understood this next part wasn't about him. We don't need politicians to tell us to be better, Jack said. We don't need ceremonies or commendations or photo opportunities. We just need to remember what we learned here, that every person deserves to be seen, that labels hide more than they reveal, and that opening a door is sometimes the bravest thing you can do. The gym erupted in applause that felt different than the polite clapping for the governor's speech. This felt real, felt earned, felt like people recognizing truth when they heard it. Jack stepped back from the microphone, done with public speaking possibly forever, and found Ella wrapping herself around his legs in a fierce hug. That was perfect, Dad, she whispered. Ryder approached the microphone next, and the crowd quieted. He stood there for a moment, this big weathered biker with his gray beard and leather cut, looking out at 500 people with an expression Jack couldn't quite read. I'm not good at this either, Ryder said finally. But Jack said something I want to make sure everyone understands. We didn't help this town to prove anything or change anyone's mind about motorcycle clubs. We help because that's what you do when people need it. That's what Marines do, what soldiers do, what decent humans do, regardless of what they wear or what label society puts on them. He paused, his hands gripping the podium edges. For 24 years, I wore a uniform and served this country, Ryder continued. I was respected, honored, thanked for my service. Then I took off that uniform and put on this cut, and suddenly I was dangerous. A criminal. Someone to be feared and avoided, but I'm the same man. Same values, same commitment to service, Same desire to make a difference. The only thing that changed was the clothing. The gym was absolutely silent now, everyone hanging on his words. "We're called an outlaw motorcycle club," Ryder said. That word outlaw carries weight, implies things. But here's what it really means. We're outside the mainstream. We don't fit the mold of acceptable society. We're the veterans who came home broken and couldn't figure out how to be normal. We're the guys who tried to fit in and failed, who found brotherhood on the road because we couldn't find it anywhere else. We're outlaws because society made us outlaws by deciding we didn't fit.
Dus
Brick stepped forward to stand beside Ryder, then Tommy, then Carlos, then all the other bikers until they stood in a line across the stage, a wall of leather and brotherhood and shared purpose. "We don't need your approval," Ryder said, and there was steel in his voice now. "We don't need certificates or commendations or acceptance. We know who we are. We know our worth. But what we need, what every veteran needs, what every person who doesn't fit the mold needs, is the chance to be seen as human, to have our actions judged instead of our appearance, to be given the same respect and dignity you'd give anyone else." He looked directly at the cameras filming this. "So here's what I want people to take from this. The next time you see a biker or a veteran struggling with PTSD or anyone who looks different or lives different than you, don't decide who they are based on fear or stereotypes or what you've been told. Ask their name. Listen to their story. Give them the same chance you'd want for yourself. That's not political. That's not controversial. That's just basic human decency." The applause started slowly but built to a roar that shook the gym. People were on their feet, cheering, some crying, others just clapping until their hands hurt. Mrs. Henderson was sobbing in her son's arms. Charlie Preston had his arm around his wife, both of them smiling through tears. Even some of the reporters looked moved, their professional detachment cracking. Governor Mitchell looked like he'd been hit with something unexpected. Whatever speech he'd planned to give after the presentations, whatever political message he'd wanted to convey, it had been rendered irrelevant by two veterans telling simple truth. He recovered quickly, politician that he was, and moved back to the microphone. "Thank you both for those powerful words," Mitchell said. "Pennsylvania is proud to honor you and all the veterans and volunteers who've made this recovery possible. Let us continue working together to rebuild not just buildings, but the bridges between us." The ceremony continued with more speeches and presentations, but Jack had stopped paying attention. He was focused on Ella, on making sure she was okay with all the noise and crowds. She seemed fine, actually, fascinated by everything, watching the proceedings with intense interest. When it finally ended and they were allowed to leave the stage, Jack was mobbed by well-wishers and reporters and people wanting to shake his hand. Ryder faced the same treatment, both of them trying to politely extract themselves from the crowd. It took nearly 30 minutes to make it to the exit, and by then Jack's face hurt from forcing smiles, and his hand was sore from shaking. They emerged into afternoon sunlight to find a surprise waiting. A group of maybe 20 people stood across from the school, holding signs. For a moment, Jack's heart sank, thinking these were the protesters Reynolds had mentioned. But as his eyes adjusted to the light, he read the signs and realized these weren't protesters. They were supporters. "Thank you for your service, all of it. Real heroes wear leather. Millbrook loves our bikers. Veterans supporting veterans." An older man stepped forward from the group, and Jack recognized him as Henry Crawford, a Vietnam vet who ran the VFW post, and who Jack had always respected. Henry snapped a sharp salute toward Ryder and the other bikers. "Wanted you boys to know," Henry said, his voice carrying the rasp of age and too many cigarettes, "that not everyone forgot what service means. You're welcome at the VFW anytime, any of you. Doesn't matter what you wear. If you served, you're one of ours." Ryder returned the salute, his face working with emotion. "That means more than you know, sir." "Enough with the sir," Henry said with a slight smile. "I work for a living. Name's Henry, and these are my brothers from the post. We wanted to make sure you knew you had support beyond the photo ops and politicians." More veterans emerged from the group, men and women of various ages and conflicts, all wearing VFW or American Legion caps, all approaching to shake hands and exchange the kind of recognition that only came between people who'd served. It was a moment of connection that felt more real than anything that had happened inside the gym. Sarah appeared beside Jack, Ella's hand in hers. Seeing them together, mother and daughter, sent complicated emotions through Jack's chest. Sarah had been present for the last 2 days, had worked without complaint, had shown up consistently. But 2 days didn't erase 2 years, and Jack found himself watching her interactions with Ella with the same wariness he might watch a suspicious engine part. "That was a beautiful speech," Sarah said quietly. "You've always been good at saying what needs to be said." "Yeah, well," Jack replied, not quite ready to accept compliments from her. "Someone needed to say it." "I'm glad it was you." Sarah looked at him directly. "I'm glad Ella has you as her father. You're teaching her to be brave and kind and to see people for who they really are. That's a gift I never gave her." "You could start now," Jack said, because despite everything, despite the hurt and anger and betrayal, he wanted Ella to have a mother who actually showed up. "I'm trying," Sarah said. "I know it's not enough. No, it doesn't make up for anything. But I'm trying to be here, to be present, to be the person I should have been all along." Before Jack could respond, Ella tugged on both their hands. "Can we go back to the shop? I want to draw more pictures." "Sure, baby," Jack said. "Let's go home." They walked back through town together, Jack, Ella, and Sarah, an incomplete family trying to figure out if they could become complete again. Ryder and the bikers split off to return to work sites, the ceremony already forgotten in favor of the actual labor that needed doing. The media vans began packing up, the story captured and ready to be broadcast, their interest in Millbrook already waning as new stories demanded attention. The shop was exactly as they'd left it, damaged but standing, a symbol of survival that felt appropriate. Jack unlocked the door and let Ella run inside, then turned to find Sarah hesitating on the threshold. "You can come in," Jack said. "It's not forgiveness, but it's not rejection either. It's just possibility." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "That's more than I deserve." "Probably," Jack agreed. "But Ella deserves a chance at having a mother, and I'm willing to let you try to be that if you're serious about staying." "I'm serious," Sarah said. "I'm not going back to California. I gave notice at my job, broke my lease. I'm staying in Pennsylvania, staying close. Even if you never forgive me, even if Ella never wants a relationship with me, I'm staying. Because running away from my responsibilities didn't make them disappear. It just made me a coward." Jack studied her face, looking for signs of deception or temporary resolve that would crumble at the first difficulty. But what he saw looked genuine. Determination mixed with regret, hope tempered by realistic understanding that words meant nothing without sustained action. "Okay," Jack said finally. "You can stay. But you earn your way back into Ella's life, understand? You don't get to be mom again just because you showed up. You have to prove you're staying, prove you're reliable, prove you're the parent she deserves." "I understand," Sarah agreed immediately. "Whatever it takes, however long it takes." They went inside together, and Jack felt like he was stepping into some parallel universe where the impossible became possible. His ex-wife helping him sort through shop debris, his daughter drawing pictures at his desk, her feet swinging because they didn't quite reach the floor. His town outside being rebuilt by unlikely heroes who'd proven that courage came in unexpected packages. The afternoon stretched into evening with the comfortable rhythm of simple work. They cleared damaged inventory, swept floors, organized tools. Sarah proved surprisingly useful, asking questions about what to keep and what to discard, following Jack's instructions without complaint. Ella moved between them, helping where she could, slowly relaxing into the strange new dynamic of having both parents present. Around dinner time, a knock at the bay door opening interrupted them. Tommy stood there with a huge grin on his face and Brick behind him carrying enough food to feed an army. "Brought dinner," Tommy announced. "Figured you might be tired of canned soup and granola bars." They'd brought actual meals, burgers and fries from a restaurant in the next town over, fresh salads, cookies that were still warm. Jack hadn't realized how hungry he was until the smell hit him, his stomach reminding him that he'd barely eaten in 3 days. They spread the food out on Jack's desk, and what followed was one of the strangest dinners Jack had ever experienced. 2 bikers, his daughter, his ex-wife, and himself, sitting around eating burgers and talking about nothing important. Tommy told stories about his college classes, making Ella laugh with descriptions of his professors. Brick talked about his metalworking business, explaining how he'd learned to weld in the Navy. Sarah asked questions and listened to answers, and slowly the tension in the room transformed into something almost comfortable. "Can I ask you something?" Ella said to Tommy during a lull in conversation. "Why did you join the Hells Angels? I mean, you're in college. You could be anything." Tommy's smile faded slightly, and he exchanged a glance with Brick. "That's a complicated question, Miss Ella. You sure you want a real answer?" "I asked, didn't I?" Ella replied with the directness of children who hadn't learned yet to avoid difficult topics. "Fair enough," Tommy said. He set down his burger and thought for a moment. "I joined because I needed to belong somewhere. My dad was a Marine, died in Afghanistan when I was 8. I grew up hearing stories about him, about the brotherhood he had with his unit, about how those guys were more than friends, they were family. And I wanted that. Wanted to be part of something bigger than myself, wanted brothers who'd have my back no matter what." "Why not join the Marines like your dad?" Ella asked. "Tried," Tommy admitted. "Medical discharge during basic. Turns out I've got asthma that manifests under stress. So there went my chance at following in my dad's footsteps. I was lost, angry, didn't know who I was supposed to be if I couldn't be a Marine. And then I met Ryder at a VA support group. He saw what I was going through and offered me a different kind of brotherhood. The club gave me purpose, gave me brothers, gave me a way to honor my dad's memory even if I couldn't serve the same way he did." Ella absorbed this with the serious consideration she brought to important things. "So the Hells Angels is like your family?" "Exactly like that," Tommy confirmed. "We look out for each other. We show up when someone needs help. We've got each other's backs. That's what family does, right?" "Right," Ella agreed. She looked at Sarah pointedly. "Real family shows up." The awkward silence that followed made it clear everyone understood the subtext. Sarah's face went pale, but to her credit, she didn't deflect or make excuses. "You're absolutely right," Sarah said quietly. "Real family shows up, and I didn't. I'm sorry for that, Ella. More sorry than I know how to say." "Then stop saying and start doing," Ella replied with devastating simplicity. Tommy coughed to cover what might have been a laugh. "Your kid doesn't pull punches, Jack." "No," Jack agreed, pride and sadness mixing in his chest. "She doesn't. Learned that the hard way." They finished dinner with lighter conversation, carefully avoiding topics that hurt too much. When Tommy and Brick finally left, promising to return in the morning for another day of work, Jack felt the exhaustion of the last few days crash over him like a wave. "Ella needs a proper bed," Sarah said, reading his tiredness. "And so do you. I booked a hotel room in the next town. Why don't you both come stay there tonight? Clean sheets, hot showers, actual beds instead of a couch and desk chair." Jack's first instinct was to refuse, to maintain distance and boundaries. But then he looked at Ella's face and saw hope mixed with hesitation, saw his daughter wanting to believe this was real, but afraid to trust it. "Okay," Jack said. "One night, but separate rooms. You've got yours. We'll get our own." "Of course," Sarah agreed quickly. "Whatever makes you comfortable." They locked up the shop and drove in separate cars to the hotel, a mid-range place that catered to business travelers, and had somehow escaped the storm's destruction. Sarah had booked a suite with 2 bedrooms, and after some negotiation, Jack agreed that he and Ella would take one bedroom while Sarah took the other. The shower was everything Jack had dreamed about for 2 days. Hot water that actually had pressure, soap that cleaned instead of just moved dirt around, privacy and quiet, and 20 minutes where nobody needed him for anything. When he emerged, clean and wearing fresh clothes Sarah had somehow thought to buy, he felt almost human again. Ella had already showered and was in bed in a room that wasn't destroyed or damaged or temporary, tucked under clean sheets with Mr. Whiskers beside her. Sarah sat in a chair nearby, reading a book she'd brought, and the whole scene was so domestic and normal that Jack felt disoriented. "I'll stay until she falls asleep," Sarah said quietly, "if that's okay." Jack nodded, too tired to argue or analyze whether this was wise. He collapsed onto the other bed in the room and was asleep before his head fully settled into the pillow. He woke in darkness to the sound of quiet crying. For a moment, Jack was disoriented, unsure where he was or what was happening. Then he heard Sarah's voice, soft and broken. "I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry I left you. I'm sorry I wasn't there for your birthdays and your school plays and all the nights you needed your mom, and I was 1,000 miles away being selfish. I'm sorry I let fear make me weak. I'm sorry I didn't fight harder to be the mother you deserved." "Mom?" Ella's sleepy voice answered. "Why are you crying?" "Because I realized what I lost," Sarah said through tears, "and I'm scared I can't get it back. I'm scared you'll never forgive me, and I wouldn't blame you because I don't forgive myself." There was a long pause, then Ella said something that made Jack's heart stop. "Dad says people can change if they really want to. He says you have to watch what they do, not what they say. So I'm watching you, Mom. I'm watching to see if you're really staying or if you're just visiting until something better comes along." "I'm staying," Sarah promised. "I'm really staying. I'll prove it to you, Ella. However long it takes, I'll prove it." "Okay," Ella said. "But Mom, if you leave again, I don't think I can let you come back a third time. My heart can't break that many times." Jack lay in the darkness, listening to his 10-year-old daughter articulate boundaries that most adults struggled to enforce, listening to his ex-wife promise things she'd broken before, and wondering if he was making a terrible mistake by allowing this. But then he remembered his own words from earlier, that courage meant doing the right thing even when it scared you, that opening doors was sometimes the bravest choice. So he chose to keep the door open, to let possibility exist alongside doubt, to give Sarah the chance to prove she'd changed while protecting Ella from being hurt again if she hadn't. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't trust, but it was a start, which was more than they'd had 3 days ago. As sleep finally reclaimed him, Jack's last thought was that everything, the storm, the bikers, the rescue, the ceremony, Sarah's return, was somehow connected by the same thread. The thread of choosing courage over fear, compassion over judgment, possibility over certainty. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. Morning came with the gentle persistence of sunlight filtering through hotel curtains, and Jack woke to find Ella already awake and sitting cross-legged on the bed, watching him with an expression that reminded him so much of her mother from years ago that his chest tightened. Sarah was gone from the chair she'd occupied the night before, but Jack could hear the shower running in the other room. "You okay, baby?" Jack asked, his voice rough with sleep. "I'm thinking," Ella replied, which was never a simple statement with her. "Dad, do you think Mom really means it this time, about staying?" Jack sat up and pulled his daughter close, buying time to figure out how to answer honestly without either giving false hope or crushing the tentative connection forming between Ella and Sarah. "I think she believes she means it," he said carefully, "and I think she's trying. But the real answer is we won't know for sure until enough time passes that we can see the pattern, you know? 1 week doesn't prove anything. 1 month starts to mean something. 6 months, a year, that's when you really know. So I have to wait a whole year to know if my mom actually wants me." Ella's voice was small, hurt in a way that made Jack want to track down every moment of pain his daughter had experienced and somehow undo them all. "No, sweetheart. She wants you. I can see that. What we're waiting to find out is if she can be the person she wants to be. If she can follow through on what she's promising. Those are different things." Jack tilted Ella's chin up so she was looking at him. "But here's what I know for absolute certain. No matter what happens with your mom, you've got me. Always. That's not a promise that needs proving because it's already been proven every single day for 10 years. Ella threw her arms around his neck. "I know, Dad. You're the best." They dressed and emerged from the bedroom to find Sarah had ordered room service breakfast. Pancakes and eggs and fresh fruit arranged on a table by the window. She looked nervous, uncertain, like someone who'd made a grand gesture but wasn't sure if it would be received well. "I hope this is okay," Sarah said. "I remembered that Ella likes pancakes with strawberries, but I wasn't sure if that was still true or if—" "It's perfect, Mom," Ella interrupted, and the simple use of that word, Mom, made Sarah's eyes fill with tears. She blinked away quickly. They ate breakfast with the kind of careful politeness of people still learning how to be around each other, making small talk about the weather and the recovery effort and anything that didn't require emotional vulnerability. But beneath the surface pleasantries, Jack could feel something shifting, some possibility taking shape that hadn't existed a week ago. His phone rang as they were finishing, Ryder's name on the screen. "Jack, you need to get back to town," Ryder said without preamble. Something's happened. Not bad, just you need to see it. 20 minutes later, they pulled into Millbrook to find Main Street transformed yet again. Overnight, someone had erected a new sign at the town's entrance, professional quality, beautifully designed with lettering that caught the morning sun. It read, "Welcome to Millbrook, where courage opens doors, population 3,047, thank you to all who serve." But that wasn't what had Ryder's voice sounding strange on the phone. What had done that was the scene unfolding in front of Jack's damaged shop. At least 50 motorcycles were parked in formation in the street, not just Hell's Angels, but bikes bearing patches from a dozen different clubs. Iron Order, Mongols, Outlaws, Banditos, independent riders with no club affiliation at all. Clubs that normally didn't mix, that had histories of rivalry and territoriality, all gathered together in what should have been impossible. And they were working. Some were unloading building materials from a convoy of trucks. Others were already starting repairs on Jack's bay doors, working with the kind of coordinated efficiency that spoke of skilled tradesmen who knew exactly what they were doing. Still more were fanning out to other damaged buildings, tools in hand, ready to help wherever needed. Ryder stood in the center of it all, directing traffic and coordination with Major Reynolds, who looked simultaneously impressed and slightly overwhelmed by the logistics of incorporating this many additional volunteers into an already complex recovery effort. "What is all this?" Jack asked as he approached, Ella's hand tight in his. "Word spread," Ryder explained, his voice carrying something that might have been pride or might have been disbelief. "About what happened here, about how this town treated us with respect after initial fear, about the work we've been doing. Clubs all over the eastern seaboard heard about it, and they wanted in, wanted to be part of something that was changing the narrative about who we are." A massive biker with a gray beard and an outlaw's cut approached, extending his hand to Jack. "Name's Bear. Heard you were the Marine who started all this by opening a door. Figured we owed you some help finishing what you started." "I didn't start anything," Jack protested. You treated brothers with respect when everyone else treated them like threats," Bear interrupted. "That matters. That means everything. So we're here to help rebuild and to show this town, and any other town watching, that motorcycle clubs aren't the enemy. We're veterans and workers and fathers and sons, same as anyone else." More bikers approached, each introducing themselves, each expressing some version of the same sentiment. They'd come from Pittsburgh and Cleveland and Philadelphia, from Baltimore and D.C., and as far away as Boston. They'd taken time off work, made arrangements with families, ridden hundreds of miles because a story about a small town in Pennsylvania had touched something in them that needed touching. Jack felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of it, by the realization that his simple decision to open a door had somehow cascaded into something far larger than he'd ever imagined possible. This wasn't just about Millbrook anymore. It was about changing perceptions, challenging stereotypes, proving that compassion and courage could bridge divides that seemed unbridgeable. "Where do you need us?" Jack asked Ryder, because standing around feeling overwhelmed wasn't going to rebuild anything. "Your shop first," Ryder said firmly. "You're the reason any of us are here. We take care of you first, then fan out to the rest of the town." What followed was the most productive day of the entire recovery effort. With over 50 skilled workers focused on Jack's shop, the repairs that should have taken weeks were completed in hours. New bay doors were installed, better quality than the originals, donated by a construction company whose owner was himself a veteran. The roof was patched and reinforced. Windows were replaced. Broken equipment was repaired or replaced with donated items. By noon, Hale's automotive repair looked better than it had before the storm. "I can't accept all this," Jack protested to Ryder as they stood looking at the transformed building. "This is too much. I can't repay." "Nobody's asking you to repay anything," Ryder interrupted. "This is what brothers do. We take care of each other. You took care of us when we needed it. Now we're returning the favor. That's how this works." Ella had been watching the work with fascination all morning, and now she approached one of the bikers, a younger man with an Iron Order patch who'd been particularly patient in explaining what he was doing. "Can I help?" she asked. "I'm good at holding tools." The biker, whose name was Marcus, smiled and handed her a wrench. "Think you can keep this safe for me while I work up on this ladder?" Ella nodded seriously, clutching the wrench like it was a sacred responsibility. And for the next hour, she was Marcus's official tool holder, handing him whatever he needed and asking endless questions about how things worked. Jack watched his daughter interact with these men who the world had taught her to fear, watched her see past the leather and patches to the humans beneath, and felt a fierce pride that had nothing to do with her academic achievements or artistic talents, and everything to do with her open heart. Sarah had stayed too, working alongside other volunteers to provide water and food to the workers. Jack watched her from a distance, watched how she interacted with Ella during breaks. Not pushing, not demanding, just being present and consistent. It wasn't redemption, not yet, but it was the patient work that might someday lead there. By mid-afternoon, the shop was complete and the motorcycle crews were dispersing to other sites throughout town. The efficiency was remarkable. What would have taken weeks with normal recovery efforts was being accomplished in days because of the sheer number of skilled volunteers who'd descended on Millbrook. Buildings were being repaired, debris was being cleared, infrastructure was being restored. And everywhere the bikers worked, attitudes were shifting. Jack watched Mrs. Henderson bring lemonade to a crew of Mongols working on her antique shop, watched her chat with them like old friends. He saw Charlie Preston showing Bear around his hardware store, the two of them discussing inventory and business challenges like colleagues. He observed Pastor Williams blessing a group of banditos who'd repaired the church sanctuary, tears streaming down the pastor's face as he thanked men he'd have crossed the street to avoid a week ago. The transformation wasn't just physical. Buildings being rebuilt, roads being cleared. It was deeper than that, more fundamental. Millbrook was being rebuilt in more ways than one, and the foundation being laid was stronger than what had existed before the storm. Sheriff Morrison found Jack around 4 o'clock, his weathered face showing something that might have been wonder. "Never seen anything like this in 40 years of law enforcement," Morrison admitted. "Got motorcycle clubs from 5 different organizations working side by side. No fights, no territorial disputes, just pure cooperation. Got townspeople who were ready to call in the National Guard a week ago now, bringing food and drinks to the same bikers they wanted arrested. It's like watching every assumption I ever had get turned upside down." "Maybe those assumptions needed turning," Jack suggested. "Maybe they did," Morrison agreed. "You know what the amazing thing is? Crime in Millbrook is down to 0 this week. With all these bikers in town, dozens of them, from clubs with serious reputations, we haven't had a single incident. Not one fight, not one theft, not even a noise complaint. They've been nothing but respectful and helpful." "Because they're people, Tom," Jack said. "People who happen to ride motorcycles and wear patches. That doesn't make them criminals any more than wearing a badge automatically makes someone a good cop." Morrison winced. "Point taken. I'm learning, Jack. We all are." As evening approached, Ryder called a meeting of all the club representatives in the high school parking lot. Jack was invited, though he felt like an outsider among these men who shared a culture and brotherhood he could observe but never fully understand. At least 50 bikers gathered in a loose circle, their different patches representing different clubs, different regions, different histories, but united in this moment by common purpose. "Brothers," Ryder began, his voice carrying easily in the quiet evening air, "we've done something remarkable here this week. We've shown this town and this country that motorcycle clubs aren't what the media portrays. We're not criminal enterprises or violent gangs. We're veterans and workers and fathers. We're brothers who look out for each other and who step up when communities need help." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathering. "But more than that," Ryder continued, "we've shown ourselves what we're capable of when we work together. Hell's Angels and outlaws working side by side. Mongols and banditos coordinating repairs. Independent clubs and major organizations all pulling in the same direction. When's the last time that happened?" "Never," someone called out. "Never happened before." "Exactly," Ryder said. "Never happened before. But it happened here because one Marine reminded us who we really are beneath the colors. Because a little girl gave us blankets when we were cold and saw angels instead of devils. Because a town learned to look past fear and see humans. And because all of you showed up to be part of something bigger than yourselves." Bear stepped forward, his massive frame commanding attention. "Ryder's right. We've proven something important here, to the world and to ourselves." Question is, what do we do with it? Do we go back to our territories and our rivalries and our isolation? Or do we take this moment and build something lasting? What are you proposing? Asked a biker with a Mongol's patch. A coalition, Bear replied. Nothing formal, nothing that compromises club independence or traditions, but a network. A way for clubs to coordinate when communities need help, to present a united front when the media tries to paint us as villains, to support each other instead of fighting each other. The silence that followed was heavy with consideration. Jack could see the internal calculations happening, weighing tradition against innovation, autonomy against cooperation, the way things had always been against the possibility of something new. Tommy spoke up, his young voice carrying unexpected authority. My dad died in Afghanistan serving this country. I tried to follow in his footsteps and couldn't because my body wouldn't let me. The club gave me a different way to serve, a different way to be part of something that matters. But if we're really about service, really about brotherhood, then shouldn't we be serving the broader community too? Shouldn't we be showing people what we've shown Millbrook, that we're forces for good when given the chance? More murmurs, these ones thoughtful rather than reactive. I'm not saying we all become best friends, Bear continued. I'm not saying we forget history or pretend differences don't exist. But I'm saying that what happened here this week changed something fundamental. It gave us a glimpse of what's possible when we focus on what unites us instead of what divides us. Seems like a waste to just let that fade away. Jack found himself stepping forward without planning to, without being asked to speak. Can I say something? He asked. Every eye turned to him, 50 battle-hardened bikers giving him their complete attention. I'm not part of your world, Jack began. I don't ride. I'm not in a club. I don't fully understand your culture or your codes. But I know what I saw this week. I saw men who'd been written off by society prove they had more honor and courage than anyone who judged them. I saw brotherhood that transcended club colors and patched territories. I saw service that didn't ask for recognition or reward. And most importantly, I saw what happens when people choose to be better than their circumstances, better than their reputations, better than what the world expects of them. He paused, gathering his thoughts. You don't need my permission or my input about what you do next, Jack continued. But if you're asking whether what happened here matters, whether it's worth building on, I think the answer is obvious. You changed this town. You changed how people think about motorcycle clubs. You changed how I think about courage and community and what it means to serve. That's not small. That's everything. So yeah, build something lasting. Show the world that this wasn't a one-time thing, that this is who you really are. Because if you can do that, if you can sustain this kind of cooperation and service, then you're not just rebuilding buildings. You're rebuilding the entire narrative about who you are and what you represent. The silence that followed was profound. Then riders started a slow clap that others joined until the parking lot echoed with applause that felt more like affirmation than celebration. The Marine has spoken, Ryder said with a slight smile. I move we form the Veterans Motorcycle Coalition. Informal, flexible, focused on community service and mutual support. All in favor? The response was overwhelming. Hands raised, voices calling agreement, bikers from rival clubs nodding at each other in acknowledgement of a shared purpose that superseded old grudges. Motion carries, Bear said. We'll work out details over the next few months, communication networks, coordination protocols, dispute resolution. But the foundation is laid here, tonight, because of what Millbrook taught us. As the meeting dispersed and bikers began preparing for departures, some leaving tonight, others staying a few more days to finish projects, Jack felt Ryder's hand on his shoulder. You did this, Ryder said quietly. All of this traces back to you opening a door. I just let some cold people inside, Jack protested. Everything else was you guys. No, Ryder said firmly. Everything else was a response to being treated with dignity. You set the tone, Jack. You showed us we still mattered, still had value, still could make a difference. We just lived up to what you already believed about us. So what happens now, Jack asked. You all leave and things go back to normal? Nothing's going back to normal, Ryder replied. Normal was broken. That's what the storm showed us. What comes next is something new, something better. For Millbrook, for the clubs, for everyone who is part of this. We're building toward different, toward better, and different is good. Ella appeared, tired but happy, her clothes dirty from a day of helping and her face flushed with the kind of contentment that came from purposeful work. Dad, Marcus said I was the best tool holder he ever had. He gave me this. She held up a patch, not a club patch, but a simple design showing a wrench and the words honorary mechanic. That's quite an honor, Jack said seriously. I know, Ella replied. He said anyone who works as hard as I did today deserves recognition. She looked up at Ryder. Mr. Ryder, are you leaving soon? Tomorrow morning, Ryder confirmed. Time to get back to regular life, but I'll visit Miss Ella. That's a promise. Good, Ella said, because you're part of our family now, and family visits. Ryder's eyes went suspiciously bright. Yes, ma'am, family visits. That night they returned to the hotel, Jack and Ella and Sarah, this strange configuration of family that was still finding its shape. Over dinner in the hotel restaurant, Sarah did something Jack hadn't expected. She pulled out a folder of papers and set them on the table. These are apartment listings, Sarah explained, in Millbrook and the surrounding area. I meant what I said about staying. I've already started looking for a place for a job at the hospital here. They're hiring nurses, and I'm qualified. I'm not asking to move back in with you, Jack. I know that ship has sailed. But I'm asking to be close, to be present, to be the mother Ella deserves, even if I'm not your wife anymore. Jack looked at the listings. Modest apartments, reasonable rents, serious research that suggested Sarah had thought this through beyond an emotional impulse. What about your life in California? He asked. Your job, your friends, everything you built there. It was a life built on running away from my problems, Sarah said, from my responsibilities, from my failures, from the hard work of being a parent and a partner. I don't want to run anymore. I want to run toward something instead of away from it. Toward being the person I should have been, toward a relationship with my daughter, toward maybe earning back some tiny fraction of what I threw away. Ella had been listening to this exchange with the intensity she brought to important things. Mom, she said carefully, if you stay, and if you get an apartment here, can I visit sometimes? Baby, you can visit whenever you want, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. I would love nothing more than having you visit, having you in my life in any way you'll allow. But you have to actually be there when you say you will, Ella continued, and you can't make promises you can't keep. And you have to understand that Dad comes first because Dad has always been there. I understand completely, Sarah agreed. Your father is an amazing man and an incredible parent. I'm not trying to take anything away from what he's given you. I'm just trying to add to it, if you'll let me. Jack watched his daughter process this, watched her weigh risks and possibilities with the maturity that shouldn't belong to someone so young. Finally, Ella nodded. Okay, you can stay, but I'm still watching to see if you mean it. Fair enough, Sarah said. I'll prove it, Ella. However long it takes. The week that followed fell into a rhythm that felt almost normal, though normal meant something different than it had before the storm. The bikers gradually departed in groups, heading back to their regular lives but staying in touch through the newly formed coalition. The National Guard began packing up as professional contractors took over the remaining heavy work. Media attention faded as newer stories captured the news cycle's fickle interest. But the changes that had been seeded during those intense days of crisis and recovery continued to grow. The new sign at Millbrook's entrance became a point of pride, townspeople posing for photos beneath it, visitors commenting on the message of courage and service. Mrs. Henderson's antique shop reopened with a new section dedicated to motorcycle memorabilia, a small but significant acknowledgement of the men who'd saved her business and possibly her life. Charlie Preston's hardware store became an unofficial gathering place for veterans of all kinds, with a corner reserved for bikers to meet and a bulletin board advertising motorcycle-friendly events. Pastor Williams incorporated into his sermons themes of not judging by appearances, of seeing the divine in unexpected places, of courage that opens doors instead of locking them. And Jack's shop became something more than just an automotive repair business. It became a symbol, a place where the story had started and where its echoes continued to resonate. Customers came from surrounding towns not just for repairs, but to see the place where a single choice had cascaded into something transformative. Jack found himself telling the story over and over, always emphasizing that he hadn't done anything special, that he'd just made the choice anyone should make when faced with people in need. Sarah found an apartment 3 blocks from Jack's shop, small but clean, and close enough for Ella to bike over after school if she wanted. She started work at Millbrook General Hospital, proving competent and reliable in ways that slowly, carefully, began rebuilding trust. She didn't push for more time with Ella than their daughter was ready for, didn't make demands or try to rush the healing process. She just showed up, consistently, day after day, proving through sustained action what words could never convey. And slowly, tentatively, Ella began to open up. First, it was just short visits after school, an hour of homework help, a shared snack, carefully supervised by Jack from a distance. Then it became occasional dinners, then weekend afternoons, then the gradual rebuilding of a mother-daughter relationship that had been shattered but might, with enough care and time, be made whole in a different form. Jack watched this unfold with mixed emotions. Relief that Ella was getting something she needed, fear that Sarah would revert to old patterns and break their daughter's heart again, cautious hope that maybe, just maybe, people really could change when they committed to the hard work of becoming better than they'd been. 3 weeks after the storm, Jack was working on a transmission replacement when a familiar rumble made him look up. A single Harley pulled into his lot, and Ryder dismounted with the easy grace of someone who lived on 2 wheels. "Couldn't stay away," Ryder said with a grin. "Had to see how things were progressing." "Progressing well," Jack replied, wiping grease from his hands. "Town's about 70% rebuilt. Everyone who lost homes has temporary housing. Businesses are reopening. Life's returning to something like normal." "And you?" Ryder asked. "How are you doing with all the attention and the changed circumstances?" Jack considered the question. "Honestly, I'm ready for the attention to fade. I'm not built for being a symbol or an example. I just want to fix cars and raise my kid and live a quiet life." "Think they'll let you?" Ryder asked. "Don't think I'm giving them a choice," Jack replied. "The story's been told. The lesson's been learned, at least by the people who are ready to learn it. What happens next is up to everyone else. I'm just going back to being Jack Hale, mechanic." "Fair enough," Ryder said. "But you should know, the coalition is working. We've already coordinated 2 other community service projects, one in Pittsburgh and one in Cleveland. Clubs that haven't worked together in decades are finding common ground. Veterans who felt lost are finding purpose." "You started something, brother. Whether you want the credit or not, that's the truth." "Then I'm glad," Jack said sincerely. "Glad something good came from all this chaos." Ella burst out of the shop office where she'd been doing homework, her face lighting up when she saw Ryder. "Mr. Ryder, you came back." "Told you I would," Ryder replied, accepting her enthusiastic hug. "Family visits, remember?" "Are you staying for dinner?" Ella asked hopefully. "Mom's cooking tonight at her new apartment. She's not very good at it yet, but she's trying really hard." The invitation extended naturally, and somehow Jack found himself sitting around Sarah's small dining table that evening with Ella, Ryder, and his ex-wife, eating slightly overcooked pasta and talking about everything and nothing. It was surreal and comfortable simultaneously, this gathering of people whose lives had been rearranged by a storm and the choices that followed. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said to Ryder during a lull in conversation. "What made you come back? After that first night, after you all left? What made you decide to return with all those other bikers?" Ryder set down his fork and thought for a moment. "Couple of reasons," he said finally. "First, because Jack opened a door when everyone else locked theirs, and that kind of courage deserves to be honored. Second, because Tommy told me about Ella bringing blankets, and I realized we'd been given something precious. We'd been seen as human instead of as threats. That needed to be acknowledged." He paused, his expression growing more serious. "But the real reason," Ryder continued, "was because I woke up the morning after the storm and realized I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Like I mattered, like what I did made a difference, like I was part of something bigger than just riding and surviving. The club gave me brotherhood, but this town gave me back my sense of service, gave me back the feeling I used to have in the Marines, that what I did mattered beyond just myself. I couldn't walk away from that. None of us could." "So you came back," Sarah said softly. "Even though this town had judged you, even though people had been cruel. You came back anyway. We came back because Jack showed us we were worth coming back for, Ryder replied. Sometimes all it takes is one person believing in you to remind you to believe in yourself. Ella had been listening to this exchange with her characteristic intensity. Mr. Ryder, she said, I'm glad Dad opened the door. I'm glad you came in. I'm glad everything happened the way it did, even the scary parts, because now I know that being brave is more important than being safe. That's a powerful lesson, Ryder said. Hold on to that, Miss Ella. The world's going to try to teach you to be cautious and fearful and to protect yourself above all else. But the real power, the real magic, is in staying open even when it's scary, in giving people chances even when they might disappoint you, in being brave enough to hope. He looked at Sarah as he said this, and Jack saw his ex-wife's eyes fill with tears. She knew Ryder was talking about more than just the storm and the bikers. He was talking about second chances and the courage it took to give them. The evening ended with warmth and promises to stay in touch, with Ryder heading back to his hotel and Sarah hugging Ella goodnight with the tentative joy of someone still learning how to be a mother again. Jack and Ella walked the 3 blocks back to the shop in comfortable silence, their breath visible in the cooling autumn air. Dad, Ella said as they reached the shop, do you think we're going to be okay? All of us? You and me and Mom and everyone? Jack pulled his daughter close. I think we're going to be exactly what we make ourselves into, he said. Nothing in life is guaranteed, baby. Not happiness, not success, not even love. But we get to choose every single day what we're building toward. We can build toward fear or toward courage, toward isolation or toward connection, toward who we've been or toward who we want to become. I want to build toward brave, Ella said decisively, like you did when you opened the door. Then that's what we'll do, Jack promised. We'll build toward brave together. The weeks continued to pass, each one bringing Millbrook closer to full recovery and bringing Jack's life closer to something that resembled normal, though it was a new normal, shaped by experience and choice in ways the old normal had never been. The shop thrived as word spread about the mechanic who'd sheltered the Hells Angels, as people came from surrounding counties for repairs and stayed to hear the story. Sarah remained consistent in her presence, proving week after week that she meant what she'd said about staying. The relationship between mother and daughter thawed gradually, like ice in spring, slowly enough to be frustrating but steadily enough to be real. Jack watched from his position as careful guardian, ready to intervene if Sarah faltered but hoping he wouldn't need to. And gradually, something unexpected happened. Jack found himself forgiving Sarah, not all at once, not in some dramatic moment of reconciliation, but in small increments spread across dozens of ordinary moments. He forgave her when he saw her patiently helping Ella with math homework, even though she'd never been good at math herself. He forgave her when she showed up to Ella's school play and sat in the audience with tears streaming down her face, knowing she'd missed so many other performances. He forgave her when he saw her struggling and trying and failing and trying again, because that was the work of growth, and he understood how hard that work was. They would never be married again. That chapter had closed, and Jack had no interest in reopening it. But they learned to be co-parents, to be friends in a careful way, to put Ella's needs above their own hurt and history. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was good enough, and Jack had learned that good enough was sometimes all you could ask for. 2 months after the storm, on a crisp November afternoon, Jack received a call from Major Reynolds. I wanted to update you on the recovery progress, she said. Official assessments show Millbrook at 93% operational capacity. That's unprecedented for this type of disaster. Most communities take years to reach that level. You all did it in 2 months. A lot of people working hard, Jack replied, deflecting credit as always. Yes, but the catalyst was you, Reynolds insisted. The governor asked me to extend his personal thanks and to let you know that Millbrook is being studied as a model for disaster recovery and community resilience. What happened here? How you all came together, how you overcame prejudices and fears. It's being written into emergency management protocols. That's great, Jack said, meaning it. If something good comes from it beyond just rebuilding buildings, then all the chaos was worth it. There's one more thing, Reynolds added. The Veterans Motorcycle Coalition that formed out of this experience. They've been contacted by FEMA about formalizing their disaster response capabilities. Motorcycle clubs as rapid response volunteers for natural disasters. It's unprecedented, unprecedented. But so was everything else that happened in Millbrook. After the call ended, Jack sat in his office looking at the wall where Ella had hung her drawings. The original picture of the motorcycles with angel wings, plus dozens of others she'd created in the weeks since. Each one showed some aspect of their story, some moment of courage or connection or transformation. Together, they formed a visual narrative of how one storm and one choice had changed everything. His phone buzzed with a text from Ryder. Heading your way next week with some of the crew. Want to do a proper visit, not just work. Thought we could take Ella for her first motorcycle ride if you're okay with it. Let me know. Jack smiled and typed back. She'll love that. See you next week, brother. The word felt natural now. Brother. Ryder had become family in the way that mattered most. Not through blood, but through shared experience and mutual respect, and the kind of bond that forms when people see each other truly and accept what they find. That evening, Jack locked up the shop and walked to Sarah's apartment where Ella was spending the night. A regular occurrence now, no longer fraught with anxiety, but simply part of their routine. Sarah answered the door with flour on her face and Ella laughing in the background about some baking disaster. We're making cookies, Sarah explained unnecessarily. Or trying to. It's not going well. They're going terrible, Ella called cheerfully. But they're going to taste good anyway because we made them together. Jack looked at his ex-wife. This woman who'd broken his heart and left their daughter, and then come back to do the hard work of earning redemption. She looked happy in a way he hadn't seen in years, covered in flour and laughing at her own mistakes, present and real and trying. You're doing good, Jack said quietly. With Ella, with the consistency, with all of it. I wanted you to know that I see it. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. That means more than you know. I'm trying so hard, Jack. Every day I'm trying to be better than I was yesterday. I know, Jack replied. And it shows. Keep it up. He stayed for a cookie, burnt on the edges and underdone in the middle, but made with love and therefore perfect, and listened to Ella tell him about school and friends and the new book she was reading. Normal, boring, beautiful domesticity that felt like a miracle given where they'd been just months before. Walking back to the shop through Millbrook's recovering streets, Jack thought about the journey that had brought them here. A storm that had broken things and revealed truths. A choice to open a door instead of locking it. 15 strangers who became brothers. A daughter who'd learned courage by watching her father practice it. An ex-wife who'd found the strength to come back and face what she'd run from. And a town that had learned the most important lesson of all, that fear serves no one, that courage opens possibilities, that seeing people as human instead of as labels changes everything. The shop was quiet when Jack returned, just the way he liked it. He made his way to the office and pulled out the dog tag he still wore around his neck, the custom one from that leadership workshop so many years ago. The words caught the light as he turned it. Honor before fear. 4 simple words that had guided him through combat and homecoming, through marriage and divorce, through struggle and success. 4 words that had made him open a door during a storm when every rational instinct said to keep it locked. 4 words that had changed his life and the lives of everyone connected to him in ways both large and small. Jack Hale, single dad and Marine veteran, had made a choice on a stormy night. He'd chosen to see people instead of patches, to offer shelter instead of suspicion, to lead with courage instead of fear. And that choice had rippled outward like water from a stone thrown into a still pond, creating waves that spread farther than he could track and changes he could never have predicted. The bikers had gone back to their lives, carrying the memory of being treated with dignity and proving they deserved that dignity through service. The town had learned that its assumptions were wrong and its fears were misplaced, and in learning that had become something better than what it had been. Sarah had found the courage to return and face the consequences of her choices, beginning the long work of rebuilding what she'd broken. And Ella, brave, brilliant, beautiful Ella, had learned that her father's courage wasn't some abstract quality, but a practical choice made moment by moment, that being scared didn't mean you had to be controlled by fear, that opening your heart, even when it might get broken, was the only way to live fully. In the end, that was the story. Not about a tornado or rescue efforts or motorcycle clubs or political ceremonies. The story was about choice, the daily, moment-by-moment choice between fear and courage, between judgment and understanding, between locked doors and open hearts. Jack Hale had chosen courage. He'd opened a door during a storm, and through that opening had flowed grace and transformation, pain and healing, ending and beginning all woven together into something that looked, from the right angle and in the right light, like redemption. Outside, the night settled over Millbrook with the gentle certainty of routine restored. The damaged buildings stood repaired. The torn earth had been smoothed. The visible scars of the storm were fading. But the invisible changes, the shifts in perspective and relationship and understanding, those would last. Those would define what Millbrook became in the years ahead, would shape how its people saw themselves and others, would echo through generations in stories told and retold about the night the Hells Angels came to town and everyone learned what courage really looked like. And in a small shop on Main Street, a single dad veteran turned off the lights and headed upstairs to the apartment above his business, to his daughter sleeping peacefully in her bed, to the life he'd built through determination and love and the willingness to do the next right thing even when the next right thing was terrifying. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new choices. There would be more storms, literal and metaphorical, more decisions about doors to open or lock, more opportunities to choose between fear and courage. But tonight, in this moment, Jack Hale allowed himself to simply exist in the peace he'd helped create, in the community he'd helped transform, in the family he'd helped rebuild. He checked on Ella one final time, adjusting her blanket and making sure Mr. Whiskers was within reach. She stirred slightly and smiled in her sleep, and Jack felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came from loving someone so much that their happiness became inseparable from your own. "Sweet dreams, baby," he whispered. "Tomorrow, we'll be brave again." Because that was the truth of it. Courage wasn't a one-time thing, wasn't something you achieved and then possessed forever. It was a practice, a discipline, a choice made fresh each day to open doors instead of locking them, to see people instead of categories, to lead with love instead of fear. Jack Hale, mechanic and Marine, father and friend, had opened a door during a storm, and through that simple act of courage had come everything else: rescue and recovery, transformation and redemption, ending and beginning all woven together into a story that Millbrook would tell for generations. A story about the night 15 strangers came to town and taught everyone what honor really meant. A story about a single dad who chose compassion over fear and changed the world one open door at a time. A story about ordinary people doing extraordinary things not because they were heroes, but because they were human and they chose to act accordingly. That was the story. That would always be the story. And it was enough.